Mr. Singh, I'm going to go ahead and share the file, but I'll keep working with you in the chats for your volume, okay?
Okay.
Good evening. It is 7 p.m. I am the Deputy Clerk, Margie Tachi. Before I get started, I have a few announcements. Tonight's regularly scheduled Herndon Town Council work session is a virtual meeting pursuant to Virginia Code Section 2.2-3708.2 as amended, the Governor's executive orders as amended, and in accordance with Ordinance 20-0-23, continuity of governmental operations during pandemic disaster COVID-19, as amended and readopted by the Herndon Town Council on September 8, 2020, which supersedes previously adopted amendments. Proper notice of the electronic meetings were provided in accordance with the Code of Virginia. Agenda and meeting materials, along with information for viewing the meeting and submitting comments for the record, are available on the town's website. This meeting will begin with a roll call to determine a quorum, and all votes, including adjournment, will be by, roll call vote. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Margie. I will call the January 19th Town Council work session to order. To increase proficiency in our meeting process, the clerk will call the attendance and roll for all votes. Please state your last name. And as the clerk calls your name to confirm your attendance, please unmute and then respond clearly with your last name and present. And the clerk will now call attendance.
The clerk is muted.
Is the clerk muted? Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Now.
Town Manager?
Ashton present.
Town Attorney?
Yates here.
Delagula?
Delagula here.
Alum?
Alum present.
DeCall?
DeCall present.
Friedrichs?
Friedrichs present.
Reagan?
Reagan present.
Singh?
I guess Singh, yes. I cannot hear you.
We're working on that currently, Mr. Singh. Mayor Olem.
Olem present. So for the record, there is a quorum electronically. And before we get started this evening, I'd like to make a few comments. Earlier this evening, President-elect Biden asked everyone to join him for a national moment of unity and remembrance in honor of the 400,000 Americans we've lost due to the COVID-19. For those who had the opportunity to watch President-elect Biden, it was very moving. And I would like to take a moment of personal privilege to ask everyone to join me for a moment of silence to remember those that have been lost due to the COVID-19. Thank you, everyone. As stated by the clerk, tonight's meeting is conducted by electronic means pursuant to the appropriate laws. I'll ask all council members to observe the meeting decorum by showing your hand, to be recognized by the chair for comments, and to observe the meeting guidelines used for all government meetings to maintain good order. When recognized by the chair, please state your last name before providing comments and when making seconds on making a motion or seconding. Thank you. First thing we have this evening is an announcement and comments from the town manager. And I'm pleased that the town manager will be discussing the next discussions that we're going to be having on housing for the town, and the manager has scheduled a second public WebEx. With that, I'll ask the town manager to please give those details as well as his comments.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This is Bill Ashton, Town Manager. As you alluded to, we are holding another public meeting to discuss housing. It is scheduled for Tuesday, January 26th at 3 o'clock. It is via WebEx. The speaker for this meeting will be Fabrizio Fazzulo, who is the Director of Policy and Planning with Virginia Housing. Mr. Fazzulo is responsible for the statewide HB 854 housing study, and he will provide us an update about that study, and he's also a resource for other efforts that might be going on at the state. The town clerk will be sending out a link later this week to council and the public for those who may want to participate in this WebEx, and he will post all notices to meet state law requirements. Also, just as a reminder, that is in advance of, we will have a public hearing later in the evening. This is a separate meeting altogether. Thank you about that. Thank you for that, opening that, Madam Mayor. Now on for the weekly COVID update. Still in conversations with many people at the state and local levels. They are telling me what you probably already know. We have a high disease burden with increasing trends. The community transmission is characterized as substantial. Case incident rate is high and continues to climb. Currently, Fairfax is experiencing about 300 new cases a day. If you compare and contrast that to like late summer, early fall, this is by a factor of 4 or 5 or 6 of what they were seeing at that time. We are also reminded that the case incident rate is a leading indicator. The lagging indicators that follow along are hospitalization, ICU, and unfortunately deaths, as we talked about a few moments ago in the moment of silence. The health departments are attributing this increase to the holidays are now being captured in the numbers. So that's one aspect. They do believe some COVID fatigue with the social distancing and masking measures are also partially responsible. 20170 is now running in 11th place in the county as far as zip codes go, and that would be how they determine that as cases per 100,000 people. And there are 47 total zip codes in the county. From a vaccine front, Fairfax has administered over 43,000 vaccines. We have over almost 4,400 fully vaccinated, which means there's been a first and a second vaccine that has occurred on 4,400 people. Statewide, we're looking at about 341,000 vaccinations that have occurred and a little over 17,000 fully vaccinated people throughout the entire state. That being said, we're always cautioned that there's some lag in reporting of the vaccine numbers because they have to be entered into the statewide database for distribution, and there are some data entry lag times involved. The goal of the NOVA health departments is to that make vaccine availability is the only limiting factor. They are staffed up. They do have people to put shots in their arms. It's just they're being controlled by the amount of people that actually, or the amount of, I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. The amount of vaccine that is actually available to be administered. This is creating an expectation problem. Departments of health don't know from 1 week to the next how many doses they'll receive each week. So they can't schedule more than 1 week in advance. Compounding the issue of the pool of eligible people has been expanded. Last week, the governor added 65-year-olds and older and 64 and under with complicating issues to phase 1B. This created almost, I would say it's hyperbole to say exponential, but it increases the pool to be vaccinated in 1B substantially. Vaccine availability remains an issue. Fairfax County had been getting about, the state of Virginia, correction, Fairfax County asked for 100,000. They've been getting roughly that a week, and 80,000 were provided this week, so they've been knocking some down because of the distribution to the states. There are pipeline issues in the manufacturing side of the house, with only 2 of 5 manufacturers having FDA approval at this time. The other 3 have yet to file for their approvals. Other supply chain issues include ingredient availability. So the ingredients that go into the vaccine, there's some availability issues there. And the fact that we are in a world environment, so there's a global distribution element to the availability question. Herd immunity, you hear that often talking about, and this came up at a call earlier today. is it 60% vaccination to reach herd immunity? It is 80% to reach herd immunity. We've heard both coming out of the federal government. Well, the variants are driving those expectation changes. So as there becomes additional variants of the virus, what you're seeing is that is causing that herd immunity number in terms of the percentage of vaccinated people to rise. We are still cautioned that vaccines, even if you get them, it is part of a layered approach, is the term of art that is used, meaning we still need to mask and distance even after having your vaccines. From a staff level, we are still getting both positives and exposures. In each case, it triggers mandatory leave for the employee. We are still able to provide core services, although it's been a challenge of late. And interestingly, I got an interesting email from the HR director recently talking about in the 10 months since COVID entered into the environment, staff has lost over 26,000 hours to COVID-related leave. And if you put that in terms, that's the equivalent of us losing 10 full-time employees. Or I'm sorry, check that, 12 full-time employees. And so that's roughly about a 5% loss in productivity capacity on the staff during that same period. So with all these other challenges going on, we also we've lost a lot of time due to COVID-related leaves. And we continue to manage our way through. With that, Madam Mayor, I will answer any questions.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions of the town manager? Yes, Ms. Friedrichs.
Friedrich speaking. Mr. Town Manager, have you heard any updates on the app called COVIDwise? Because I've gotten a lot of comments online of people who, and I believe Mr. Duckhall is one of them, who have COVID, who wish to put it on COVIDwise, but they can't do it without a PIN, and they can't get the PIN unless the health department reaches out to them. So have you heard anything about that? Are they having difficulty reaching out to people with COVID?
When last I spoke to Dr. Gloria, which has been over a week, she did not mention anything about issues with reaching out to do COVID case follow-ups. But what I do know from what we saw earlier this spring and summer is that as those cases rise to a level of 300 per day, it becomes increasingly more difficult for us to go in and do contact tracing. Not us, but I mean the Department of Health, to go in and do contact tracing. So it just puts, again, is that number is rising at such a substantial rate that what you're seeing is the inability to keep up. That said, she did mention they're adding additional contact tracers to the mix. As far as just FYI, I know the county had some issues yesterday with their vaccination registration system. So they've had some technical issues they've been working through as well. I'm not sure if it's been affecting this system or not particularly, but it's something to also be aware of.
In that case, are you saying that my understanding was that the COVIDwise app would allow just the population in general to know if they'd come in contact with anybody. So it's kind of an automatic contact tracing. That's why I'm a little disturbed to hear this. And if you don't know anything about it, would you?
I don't know
next time you speak.
about it.
Yeah, next time you speak to someone at the health department, could you mention that?
Yes, I will.
Thank you. That's all.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions of the town manager? I'm not seeing any, so we're on to the next portion. And this is the part of our agenda where we ask the clerk whether members of the council have provided comments or any disclosures for the record. If any person has reached out to you with any comments on any items under consideration before the council, would you please forward those to the town clerk for the record? And the clerk provides the council with a packet of all comments entered into the record for the meeting. With that, I'll ask whether the clerk has received any comments for the record and whether any transaction disclosure declarations from council on any items listed on the agenda this evening.
No, Madam Mayor, the clerk has not received any comment for the record or disclosures from council on any items listed on the agenda this evening.
Thank you. Public hearings. We have several public hearings listed on our agenda this evening, and the first is the Resolution 21G18 to consider a special exception application, SC 20-03, to permit an accessory dwelling unit and its accessory structure associated with a single-family residence in the R15 residential single-family district. And we'll call on David Stromberg, the zoning administrator, for the staff report.
All right. Good evening, Mayor Olem, Vice
Good
Mayor
evening.
Daley, and new and returning members of the Town Council. I'm David Stromberg, the zoning administrator for the town. So tonight, I do have a presentation which is being, while that's loading, and it is for special exception number 20-03, which is a request for an accessory dwelling unit located at 763 Dranesville Road. Next slide. I'm briefly going to cover what special exceptions are generally, and for each zoning district in the town, the zoning ordinance lists uses which are permitted by right, which just means that they're allowed to go in, uses that are not permitted, and the ordinance also lists uses which may be permitted through the special exception process. So a special exception does require a public hearing by both Planning Commission and the Town Council, and the approval or denial of that special exception is by the Town Council vote. The special exception requires individual review of the location, site design, configuration, and density of a proposed use. The special exception process also allows the town to impose conditions on the approval of the proposal in order to mitigate any potential negative impacts that may occur of that particular use. And a special exception can be for either a principal use or an accessory use. Next slide. So talking of accessory uses, an accessory use is one that's clearly incidental to and customarily associated with the principal use and must be located on the same lot as the principal use. An accessory structure is a subordinate building that's located on the same lot as the principal building or within a portion of the principal building. And an accessory dwelling unit is both of those things. And it's an accessory use and an accessory structure. And it can be located in a detached structure or within a principal structure. Next slide. The property, which is outlined in red, is zoned R15, which is residential single family district. And this is one of the larger residential single family district classifications we do have in the town. The property is also located within the historic district overlay boundary, which is shown there on the map. Next slide. This is a map of the 2030 Comprehensive Land Use Plan, and this designates the property as well as the neighborhood around it as a neighborhood conservation district. And this designation seeks to maintain and promote existing single-family neighborhoods. Next slide. Property is located at the southwest corner of Dranesville Road and 3rd Street. Parcel is approximately 22,000 square feet in area. The house fronts onto Dranesville Road, but the driveway access is provided off of 3rd Street. There's an existing garage that is located on the property behind the house, and the proposal includes removing the roof from the existing garage and adding a half story on top of the garage, and that would contain the accessory dwelling unit. Next slide. So in addition to the special exception requirement, the zoning ordinance also lists other provisions that an accessory dwelling unit must comply with. Property owner must live in either the principal dwelling or in the accessory dwelling. Either the accessory dwelling or the principal dwelling must be occupied by someone who is over the age of 62 or someone with physical, mental, or cognitive disabilities. The maximum size of any accessory dwelling unit is limited to either 35% of the primary structure, which is the main house, or 1,200 square feet, whichever is less. Maximum height of an accessory dwelling unit, if it's detached, is 15 feet. And you must be able to provide an additional off-street parking space. So the minimum for every single family residence is 2 spaces. If you have an accessory dwelling unit, you have to be able to provide at least 3 parking spaces. Next slide. Again, the applicant is proposing to remove the roof of the existing 2-car detached garage and to add a taller gable roof with front and rear shed dormers to create that living space above. The accessory dwelling unit space will include full independent living quarters consisting of a bedroom, bathroom, living room, and the kitchen. The proposed living space of the accessory dwelling unit is 530 square feet, which does comply with the maximum that is allowed for this property. The property owner and the owner's mother, who's the intended occupant of the accessory dwelling unit, both meet the requirements set out in the ordinance for the occupancy. Next slide. So on the screen is a view. This is the existing single-family dwelling that's facing Drainsville Road. The house is approximately 1,600 square feet, and then no alterations are proposed to the actual house itself as part of this application. Next slide. Now you can see a view. This is the existing garage that's out there currently. This view is from the 3rd Street side. And as I mentioned, the proposal includes repairs to the ground level portion of the garage and then removal of that garage roof so that the living space can be added on top of the structure. Next slide. So here is the proposed site plan. It shows the existing house and the existing garage. Again, both of those are going to remain in their current locations because the accessory dwelling unit will be added to the garage. So there is no expansion in footprint. The water and sewer connections will be run from the main house to the accessory dwelling unit. There will not be any new taps to the water and sewer out in the street. And you can also see, in addition to the 2 garage parking spaces, this property does have a circular driveway, and so there's additional parking just to the right of the garage as well as in that circular area as well. Next slide. This is the proposed front elevation of the garage with the accessory dwelling unit shown on top of it. And this is the side of the garage that will be facing 3rd Street. Next slide. This is the proposed left side elevation of the garage, again, showing the accessory dwelling unit on top. And then this also shows the door, which will be the main residential access to the accessory dwelling unit. You can walk in through this door, which will take you into a staircase, which will then take you up to the accessory dwelling unit, or you can use it to walk into the garage. Next slide. And this is that garage floor plan. Again, the top left of the screen, that's showing that exterior door we just looked at, which is the staircase that leads up to the accessory dwelling unit, or again, into the garage. And then there are the 2 garage bays, which can fully contain the 2 cars, and you can park in the garage and take the stairs up to the accessory dwelling unit. Next slide. Here is the proposed 2nd floor plan of the actual accessory dwelling unit itself. You can see there's the combined kitchen living area up there. There is a bedroom that is off to the side and separated, and then a full bath, which is separated as well from the remainder of the unit. Next slide. So here is a summary of the proposed conditions. There will be a requirement for conformance with the submitted materials, limiting the maximum size to 535 square feet for the accessory dwelling unit portion. only one accessory dwelling unit will be allowed on this property. The owners are required to comply with the ownership and occupancy requirements that are listed in the ordinance. They are required to record this approval, if it is approved by the council, in the circuit court so that it runs with the land records. And they are required to provide and maintain that required parking that's on site. And there is a condition on conversion back to a by right use upon change in ownership of the property. Next slide. So staff will be recommending approval of this special exception application next week with the proposed conditions. And I'm happy to answer any questions that the council might have.
Okay. Are there any questions from the council on this item? Mr. Vice Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This is Del Aguila. Mr. Stromberg, thank you for that overview. Just real quick, and for my own recollection and for the public. So when, proceeding with the assumption that this is approved, the owners then go to sell it. What happens then?
At that point, there is a conversion condition placed on there. So it would have to be something that goes to a by right use. And what that actually means is removal of a portion of the kitchen area in that accessory dwelling unit. The rest of that space above the garage is allowed to remain, but the kitchen components, so the heavy duty wiring, the stove, and if they do have those wider drain lines, those would all have to be removed upon sale of property.
No, thank you for repeating that. And I just wanted to make this one of the topics of discussion for our strategic planning. Perhaps this is something we can address, because for me, this makes no sense. I think if you look at it going forward, I think this adds value to people's property. It adds value to selling. So I'd like us to consider addressing these types of conditions as we move forward. Thank you.
Are there any other questions?
I have a comment.
Mr. Reagan, I saw your hand first. Mr. Reagan.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor. I don't know if crosstalk is appropriate, but I do have a question for the Vice Mayor. I forget what your phrasing was, but were you expressing concern about like the approval of this application or the manner in which it would have to be unwound if it's sold? I just want to ask because they're two very different things.
Madam Mayor.
Right now, we're asking for questions from the staff on this. And just for the record, there will be a report given to the Planning Commission in February, and that might answer some of your questions. But as what pertains to the current item on the agenda, can we use this time to ask questions for those? But
yep. My apologies, Madam Mayor.
Yeah. Please keep check on your emails because the Planning Commission will be getting a report about ADUs in February. Thank you, Mr. Singh.
Well, I have seen concern as the Vice Mayor, and I know I realize you made some comments here. I would be very disturbed that somebody would invest money into creating that unit for their family members, and that the next owner, whoever that may be, would have to take all these things down.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Singh. And this will be coming up in February on that report with the Planning Commission and those things. But we're talking about an item that is currently on, and we're going by our current zoning. Thank you.
I understand that, but I am not going to go to a Planning Commission meeting. And it's just too much for us to go there and think about that we are going to make some comments. I think we are. I don't know what Planning Commission is really going to decide on. How it
okay. Okay. Thank you. Let's stay on topic and let's. Thank you, Mr. Singh.
This is a general question, but I do want to take this opportunity to say that here is a relatively what should I call straightforward thing that somebody wants to live in there. But then that person has to go to before HPRB or whatever it's called now, has to come before the council, has to come before the planning commission. It is so bureaucratic and so.
Okay, Mr. Singh, again, Mr. Singh, thank you. If you have a question for the staff on this item, we're not talking about changing ordinances on this item.
The question I would like to ask is, where do these regulations really come from that make it so bureaucratic?
Mr. Singh, we'll see if we can get staff to send you a copy of those regulations so that you can study them.
Very good, thank you, ma'am.
Does anyone else have a question to staff? Yes, Ms. Friedrichs.
This is a question that had just occurred to me tonight, but when we say someone has to have one extra piece of off-street parking space, are we including the spaces inside a garage or just driveway spaces?
We do include spaces inside the garage as well as driveway spaces.
Okay. And did the Planning Commission express any concerns about this when they saw it the first time?
Dave Stromer, zoning administrator, responding. They didn't have any concerns about parking. They did share some of the similar concerns as far as the removal requirement for on the sale of the property. That was why the chair of the Planning Commission requested that staff come back with a report for what some of the other localities are doing regarding regulation of accessory dwelling units. It's a little bit all over the board with the different localities, and a lot of them are changing. So we're going to put that together and present that to the Planning Commission. And it may be a future zoning text amendment. The way the condition is written now, if the zoning does change in the future to make it a little bit more permissive, which I'm not sure if that is going to be the case, but if that does happen, then the way it's worded, they wouldn't have to remove the kitchen components because it says converted to a legal use in the zoning ordinance. So if the zoning ordinance changes, then this particular applicant wouldn't be punished by going through the process beforehand.
Thank you. I share the concerns of my two colleagues who've mentioned it, that, you know, I know that you can sell the property to someone who also has a similar condition, but it does seem to restrict them unnecessarily. So I'm looking forward to this meeting in February, and thank you.
Okay, are there any other questions? Mr. DeCall.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This is Councilmember DeCall. Mr. Stromberg, so my one question is, what are the council's direction here? I mean, what can we do? Can we just approve the way it is presented to us, or is there anything, for example, do we have any authority to change any conditions, eliminate any conditions, and then approve here?
Yes, that's correct. The staff recommendation is the conditions as they are worded, but as the council, you do have the option to amend those conditions from what staff has originally submitted. You can approve it without conditions, or you can opt to continue the meeting or send it back to the Planning Commission for further discussion.
All right, thank you. So in that case, Madam Mayor, I think the questions and concerns raised by some of my council members here, Vice Mayor here, I think it makes sense because we have an authority to change or amend the conditions there. Then obviously discussion in this periphery, like you know, for example, when it has to be sold, this is the condition being given, but can we remove the conditions and then approve it? Maybe that's where the council was going. That's where probably the vice mayor was also going. So I think that that discussion needed to be entertained. Thank you.
Okay, are there any other questions?
No, Madam Mayor.
Has anyone that has not spoken? Okay, Mr. Vice Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This is Delagula. Question to the town attorney. Building on what Councilmember DeCall just asked, are we within legal boundaries to move in this direction, to approve without future conditions? And if so, then would it make sense to update the current ordinance so we're not having to go through this process each and every time moving forward?
Well, a zoning ordinance amendment would be something separate and apart, and would have to go through the initiation process to the Planning Commission and back to the council. That's by state law and by our town code. So that may be what happens, or what Council and Planning Commission decide. But with regard to this particular application, I think it would be prudent to perhaps give staff the chance to explore and address the question you're asking at the public hearing. I think then it could be most fully laid out as an option.
Okay, Ms. Friedrichs?
Mr. Stromberg, have the applicants expressed any interest in us doing this, removing this in their application, their original application? I don't want to give them something they don't need.
We can reach out and talk with the applicants. We have provided them with the list of conditions moving forward, and they've been okay with them so far.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. The next public hearing is ordinance 21-0-1.
Sorry.
Yes, sir, Mr. Del Aguila.
Sorry for the interruption. So this is Del Aguila. So was that consensus to have staff explore? Is that what staff is going to do?
I did not hear that being presented. The consensus was.
I heard consensus. I heard a consensus for that, so I just wanted to check. It sounded to me like we did.
I did not hear consensus on starting something like that, but we can certainly do something like that.
Well, I'm counting hands, so maybe.
Mr. Town Attorney, please. Mr. Town Manager, please.
Wow, this is Bill Ashley, Town Manager. Thank you for promoting me on the fly. That was good. Battlefield Commission, I suppose. No, my notes here are that we're going to reach out to the applicant. And we can always prepare an alternative resolution for you to consider. So if there's consensus or not, I think there's enough interest for us to do an alternative resolution here. And you all can choose which resolution to move next week and take action on. Would that be acceptable?
Oh, okay. That wasn't what I heard the Vice Mayor say, but okay.
That's what I was asking. I think the heads nodding indicate that we're on the same page. So let's proceed with that. I'm good with that. Thank you.
Okay. Then Mr. DeCall.
Madam Mayor, I have one more question or request here. For example, and I certainly agree with Councilmember Friedrichs that if we try to do something, whether the applicant wants that condition being removed or added or not, that we only know on the public hearing when if the applicant comes and shares their view. Otherwise, we do not know. We know what the staff presents. Staff may communicate with the applicant, but what the applicant says, whether they adhere to the conditions or they want the conditions to be removed, we do not know that. So if it is possible that we get to know, once the staff presents any of these conditions to the applicant and what is their take on that, that will also help us to make the decision, which is obviously to help the applicant at the same time to make sure we follow the rules and procedures that we have.
Yes, I appreciate that. And the question was asked of Mr. Stromberg whether or not that was expressed in the planning commission meetings, because this did have to go to the planning commission first. Is that correct, Mr. Strongberg? Okay. Ms. Friedrichs? Ms. Friedrichs, you got another comment? Question?
Yes, ma'am. I just wanted to say that I appreciated the clarification of the vice mayor, because I was a little confused about what we were asking staff to do and whether or not they were anticipating that there were enough of us asking. So I do appreciate that. Thank you.
Ma'am,
And Mr. Singh.
What I am concerned about, because the question really is that why actually does it have to go to a planning commission, that this issue is of such an importance that has to go to an entire planning commission? Why is it that way? Because that is an important question here from an overall planning point of view, from a zoning point of view. This is somewhat a small thing, and in terms of life in the town. And why would it have to go to a planning commission? Can somebody explain in a simple way that these things have to be decided by a planning commission or some other board? Why? I mean, council can do that, should be able to do that. I like somebody to answer that question in writing or otherwise.
Okay, perhaps someone can get back to you. That doesn't really pertain to this. I mean, this is something you want to explore, and I think that would be good to have someone get that information to you.
What I'm concerned about is that given my two terms on the council, this was not an isolated example of where small things take so much time and have to be sent to the boards or something, that decisions that can be made very quickly. This is something that it happens all the time, and this is, I never have understood why things are so bureaucratic. Why is it that we can't make decisions quickly? Because it is not spending money on the architect, person is spending money on otherwise, time and money, and it is not something small. What is our real objection?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Town Attorney. I think you're going to need some explanation about our ZOTA, and I think would the Town Attorney be willing to discuss that? Or would that be a meeting in the future?
Madam Mayor, Lisa Yates, Town Attorney. I had planned for our new members to give an explanation of the zoning ordinance text amendment and why that, how that works and why that's necessary. I'll be happy to do that now. I'm thinking perhaps the question that Mr. Singh is asking is, why do amendments to the zoning ordinance have to go to the Planning Commission first before going to council? If that's the question, I'd be happy to give that explanation now if everyone would like to hear it. Otherwise, I will reserve it for our zoning ordinance text amendment later in the agenda.
Yes, because we do have that item coming up on the agenda, and that would be most appropriate for you to explain that. And perhaps Mr. Reagan will be able to help us out with that, having spent quite a few years doing just this type of thing. Okay, so we're going to move on to the next public hearing, which is Ordinance 21-0, approval to approve the dedication of a right-of-way for a public street purposes on the town-owned property located at the northeast quadrant of the intersection of Herndon Parkway and Van Buren Street, known as Haley Smith Park, and that's at 320 and 324 Van Buren Street. And I'll recognize John Irish for the staff report, Director of Public Works. And I'm going to guess that they're loading up.
I'm trying to get my video going. There we go. Good evening, Madam Mayor and Town Council members. My name is John Irish. I'm Deputy Director of Public Works. And I will provide a very kind of concise, brief overview of this project and the ordinance as related to the project needs. Lori Sigler, Deputy Town Attorney, will assist and help with our staff report and other items. So this ordinance is requesting town council approval to provide right-of-way at the Herndon intersection Van Buren Improvement Project. Particularly, this easement, which is currently town-owned park property, will remain town property. It's just changing to right-of-way so that the town will be able to maintain and better service this piece of town property once it is completed as part of the project. So this project is improving the intersection and is intended to be part of multiple projects in providing access and multimodal connectivity to the Silver Line station when it opens. We also are going to be improving, I'm sorry, can we switch slide? And one more slide. I got ahead of my slide flipper. Also, we're improving other improvements, including pedestrian signalization, road drainage in that particular intersection is bad. We'll be improving that. We're providing better stormwater management for the road that we'll be improving with a turn lane. We also will be providing ADA compliant facilities as a part of that. And we will be utilizing the existing right-of-way as much as possible. Next slide, please. So some of the previous council members, you'll remember, we've acquired easements and right-of-way at this intersection project previously. And this is just one last piece. If you look at this depiction, the Haley Smith Park is in the upper right corner. It's the northeast quadrant. Right at the corner in red is the property we're talking about. Again, this is town-owned property. It's remaining town-owned property, and it's simply changing its type of use from being regular property to right-of-way. That is basically the end node of the sidewalk bike trail coming from the north, and there will be complementary ADA ramps, etc., and that is the need that has to change it to right away. And let's take the next slide, please. You see a blow up here. Again, it's northeast quadrant, and you see the town Haley Smith property on the upper right corner. All the other right-of-way and easements for this project have already been acquired. So this is just changing the use from standard property to right-of-way. And with that, I'll turn it over to Lori for some of the other detail related to this ordinance.
Thank you, John. Good evening, Madam Mayor, new members of Town Council, and those returning. I'm here to kind of walk you through the staff report a little bit. John got you familiar with the project and the reason why we need to, it's really just redesignating the use of this property. In order to do that, the state code does require that any widenings of roads in the town to be first heard by the Planning Commission and then approved by the council. And because this road project is a long-standing CIP project, that process has already occurred. Most recently last year, this project was approved again in the CIP, first having gone through the Planning Commission and then through the Town Council. There is a need for a public hearing to convey this property. The Virginia Code does require that when a town conveys interest in real estate, that it does hold a public hearing before that conveyance occurs. And if you'll see attached to the staff report, there is a deed. And that deed, again, is really just redesignating this property to specifically be used for right-of-way purposes. I do want to point out that, and I apologize that there is an error in the staff report, the actual square footage that needs to be conveyed for right-of-way is actually 1,469 square feet. The staff report says 1,489. But the ordinance that is with the staff report is correct, and so is the deed. So essentially, what the deed is going to be doing is designating this for public purposes, for road purposes. And what this will allow us to do by reclassifying, if you will, how the property is being used, we could now issue right-of-way permits. If other utility providers need to occupy this property, we now have a process in place, whereas they would be getting a right-of-way permit in order to do their work. So again, by reclassifying this, it does serve a purpose in the future. And if by approving the ordinance, you are approving the deed as well and authorizing the mayor to sign that deed. And I am finished with the staff report, but I am happy to answer any questions you may have.
With that, does anyone have any questions of staff on this issue? Mr. Singh.
The way the drawing is sort of difficult to follow, there is a little expansion of the roadway along Van Buren Street on the right hand side, and then there is this rectangular kind of area. Is that for some specific use that you are contemplating other than just the roadway? Because the square area seems.
Could you put up the fourth slide? Slide number 4, is that possible? So I'm sorry, Mr. Singh, this is John Irish, Deputy Director. Which particular piece of the easements are you asking about?
I am talking about, I don't know how to say, this little square or so, if you would say red square, the expansion coming along this way and then goes to Van Buren, but that particular area at the very corner I'm asking whether that is for some other use other than the roadway, because it seems like it is not really in the roadway, a part of it.
If you're speaking of the red square in the upper right, yes, that is part of the roadway improvement. What is happening that causes that to be in that configuration is there's a sidewalk and bike path coming down along the frontage of Haley Smith Park, parallel to Van Buren. When it reaches the intersection, there is a sidewalk coming from the bottom right. You see the red, that is sidewalk right away that we acquired. There is obviously on the opposite upper left corner another intersecting sidewalk that we already have in right away. So you have 3 intersecting sidewalks and trails, which creates the need to include space for the ADA handicap ramps, pedestrian signal, etc. So that is all currently town property. We're just now designating that square that you see into right-of-way so that we can do as Lori described and allow us to regulate and administer right-of-way permits and other things to allow us to take care of that in the appropriate manner. Does that help?
Helps a little bit, I should say. And unless you know the details, it's sort of hard to figure out from this one. These are seat of the pants questions here that come to my mind, but once we look at what you have in mind, maybe there will be more questions.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone else have a question? With the presentation up there, it's okay. There we go. Now I can see everyone. I don't see anyone with a question about this land use at Haley Smith Park. So the next public hearing is ordinance 21-0-2 to approve and authorize the mayor to sign the fifth lease amendment with T-Mobile Northeast and successor in interest to Optimal Communications, CAP Operations, LLC, to revise the premises description, approval of approved equipment list, drawings, monthly rent, and town contact information at the town's 3rd Street water tower. And with that, I'll recognize Tammy Chastain, the Deputy Director of Public Works, for the staff report.
Good evening.
Tammy.
Good evening. Good evening, Madam Mayor and members of Town Council. I am Tammy Chastain, the Deputy Director of Public Works. As we mentioned, this is an ordinance to approve the fifth lease amendment with T-Mobile at the town's 3rd Street water tank, which is located at 806 3rd Street at the intersection of 3rd Street and Van Buren. T-Mobile currently has 4 antennas installed on the water tank. With this amendment, they would be adding 8 additional antennas. The amendment also includes an upgrades or replacements of existing accessories and equipment that allow for the proper operation of the antennas, as well as some upgrades to existing equipment in their existing ground facility. If this, I did want to mention that if this is approved at the public hearing, then the next step would be to go to community development to for the ARB process to submit that information. They don't typically go through the process, but we submit it and verify, make sure that it needs to, what process it needs to go through. After that, they would get a building permit. So they plan to build as soon as they can, but they do have a couple more processes to go through. And they would, have to stay within our guidelines and ordinances, such as noise ordinances. And any exceptions or variations would have to be submitted in writing to us to go through the proper channels. This change in would also increase the lease amount that the town receives by $1,200. That would make the total amount we get from them a little over $5,500 a month. And with that, do you have any questions?
Does anyone on the council have a question? Mr. Singh?
Well, I don't know whether I have questions, but I live next door. And this kind of additional antennas and all have been an issue for a long time. With me too, you know what I mean. It affects all the properties, which is not a subject of what you are doing right now. But this particular tower, as you know, there are buildings on the ground floor that have been built over time. Over the years, it started with one antenna and it has expanded. And what has done is that this property generates tremendous amounts of rainwater and so forth. That's one of the issues. And it affects not only my property a little bit perhaps, but people all over the place. So and
Mr. Singh, thank you very much for that report. But do you have a question, Mr. Singh, for the staff?
I this into a question, but I'm concerning a concern that is there, is that you are getting this revenue, which is now runs into hundreds of thousands of dollars or more than that, is that we should, why don't we devote some of those revenue geared into as a part of maybe this approval towards creating those conditions to...
Okay, Mr. Singh, if you have a question about this issue, but if you have a question about how the money is spent, that's a whole nother question. And that has something to do with the water fund, and it doesn't really have anything to do with this.
Question with respect to this thing, but the thing that I want to raise is that these antennas and these buildings create community issues that are not dealt with, and this is the only time I can say that something needs to be done and let the other council members know that we have some significant problems that the town staff needs to take care of. And we
Okay, thank you, Mr. Singh. If you want to have a study put forward, that really would need to come at a different point. This is a time to ask questions about this specific event. Do you have any questions about this simple authorization that we're considering?
No, ma'am, I do not have any questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay. With that, we'll move on to the general agenda. The next 6 items listed are on the general portion of the agenda. And the first one is 21-G-07 to ratify a temporary.
Mayor?
Yes.
Madam Mayor, did we discuss the Alabama Drive water tower?
Oh.
That's 21003.
You're right. That page caught on the bottom. Thank you very much, Madam Mayor. Madam Town Attorney. So the last public hearing item is ordinance 21-0-03, and that is to approve and authorize the mayor to sign a third lease amendment to the new Circular Wireless LLC doing business as AT&T Mobile to revise the premises description and equipment list and use of the premises drawings and the town's contract information at Alabama Drive Water Tower. Tammy Chastain again.
Good evening again, Madam Mayor, members of Town Council. Tammy Chastain, Deputy Director of Public Works. As mentioned, this is the third lease amendment for New Singular Wireless, or AT&T, at the town's Alabama water tank, which is located at 624 Alabama Drive, near the intersection of Alabama and Van Buren Street. For this one, the majority of the changes are minor and upgrades to existing equipment. There's no new equipment going in. I mean, nothing other than new sizes, new equipment for upgrading existing. The changes, I did want to mention that there are changes to the size limits to some of these, but that is mostly intended to allow for some flexibility as technology changes and equipment changes. And this would go through a similar process as the previous information submitted, community development, and then onto a building permit. This amendment will not increase or decrease the amount we receive monthly from AT&T. And I guess with that, I would take any questions as well.
Okay, does anyone have any questions about this item? Any of the council members have any questions about this item? Okay, being none, now we'll move to the general items. We have 6, and the first would be Resolution 21G-07 to ratify a temporary license agreement between the town of Herndon doing business as Mile 20 at Mediterranean Breeze and the use of public property in the right-of-way for temporary outdoor seating. And as you recall, this was deferred from our January 12th public hearing, and I'll call on the town attorney for the staff report.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Lisa Yates, Town Attorney. As the mayor indicated, this item was continued from last agenda, where there were a couple of other similar licenses that were ratified by the council. The town staff has been working through some issues with the owner of this establishment, and we have put it back on the agenda for consideration this at your public hearing next week. As I previously explained with regard to these temporary licenses for the use of town property for outdoor dining, they were developed in response to Governor Northam's phased reopening of Virginia back in May, following the initial COVID pandemic outbreak. The process was streamlined by town staff to allow licenses to be issued to use certain town property. for outdoor dining. There were 3 types of outdoor dining scenarios identified: those on private property, those on town sidewalks, and those on town parking lots. In order to streamline the process, an application was allowed to be filed with the staff. Upon approval of the staff, the town manager, through his power to sign certain instruments under the continuity of government, would initially sign these licenses, and upon town council ratification at the next available town council public hearing, they would have a license. The Breeze, Mile 20, had a license to use the parking lot behind their building beginning in May. That went all the way through the end of November, pursuant to 1 extension. When that expired in November, there was a desire to continue leasing or licensing that particular area for outdoor dining through the end of May. So the town manager, upon approval of the license, signed the license, and it's now being brought to you for ratification. So next week you will be asked to consider ratification of the temporary license, which would allow the outdoor dining to continue through May of next year. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Are there any questions on this item? Mr. Singh.
I just have a quick question. Maybe it is all this stuff is in the background document. I would like actually a diagram of some kind that shows where exactly this seating is and what is being permitted.
Mr. Singh, there are diagrams and actually photographs attached to the license that is attached to your package.
Okay. I will take a look at that. Thank you.
Okay, several pages of them.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, yes, Ms. Friedrichs, please.
Madam Town Attorney, why was this one held back last week? I must have spaced it when you explained.
I'd be happy to communicate with you on that particular issue, and happy to communicate confidentially with anyone that would like to receive a communication.
Oh, okie dokie. Well, thank you very much, Madam Town Attorney.
Okay. The next item we have is Resolution 21G-19 to ratify a temporary emergency extension lease to the Ordinance 20-0-23 for the continuity of governmental operations as amended between the town and Evidence Analytics. And Scott Robertson, the Director of Public Works, will give us the staff report.
Good evening, Madam Mayor and members of Town Council. This is Scott Robinson, Director of Public Works, and it looks like there's my video. So this is for the ratification of a temporary emergency extension of the lease between the town of Herndon and Events Analytics. This is at 397 Herndon Parkway. They are currently in a 1-year lease for 3,512 square feet in the 397 Herndon Parkway building. That lease was set to expire on December 31st, 2020. They indicated that their space needs have changed and would like to negotiate a new lease. So this extension will give us a time to get with them and negotiate a new lease and talk about their space needs. This extension for 6 months would expire June 30th, 2021. Current rent is $5,000 per month, which is what they were paying under the existing lease. And this is for ratification of the emergency extension.
Okay, so is that the entire report?
That is it.
Okay, does anyone have a question about this item, about this lease? Okay, seeing none, the next item is Resolution 21G-20 to provide guidance to the town manager on the development of the FY 2022 budget. And I'll recognize the town manager.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This is Bill Ashton, Town Manager. If we can get Jenny Tripoli, Karen Gagliano aboard, that would be very nice. Thank you. As you recall, at the outset of the budget process, each year the staff asks the council to formalize some budgetary guidance for which we can then, from a very broad-based policy perspective, so we can start drawing together and pulling together the budget and start making some of the tough decisions that need to go into the budget process so that we can provide back to you a product that is somewhat close to what you were advising us. Now, that being said, there are still other avenues for us to talk specifically once we get into the details about the revenues and some of the expenditure requests that we're seeing from the various departments. And those are done in the one-on-one meetings that we have with you in February. But right now at the outset, we asked for a broad-based resolution adopted by the council that expresses that. 2 weeks ago, we talked about some very broad-based things. When we got down in the weeds on revenues, we got down in the weeds on some of the expenditure patterns, some of the strategies we were utilizing, some of the strategies we're looking at moving forward. And we had a very, I think, a robust conversation about that. That said, we're hoping tonight to pull you back up to a level to where we can get some more broad-based executive level guidance for us to then craft a budget towards. So with that, Jess, can you throw the draft resolution that we have come up with on the screen? And while we're waiting for that, just to recall, Jenny is also here. She'll take over at some point in this conversation. She's here for questions, as is Karen Gagliano. Can you scroll down, please? Through the boilerplate, whereases, and get down to the be it resolved section, please. All right, up just a little bit. This is not the easiest thing to deal with. Scroll, you're on the second page, I believe. If you can go back to the first page at the bottom, please. Or can you? If not, I can bring it up here.
Mr. Town Manager, I'm able to scroll on my screen, and perhaps the other council members can as well.
Oh, that'd be good. Yes, I can. I'm sorry. That is on me. So if you could scroll down to the now, therefore be it resolved section of the first page. So one of the concepts that you all were very interested in 2 weeks ago was us looking at an array of expenditure options, and from a max to a mid to a min of what we thought the expenditures were going to be. We don't have any more data to show you this week than we were able to show you 2 weeks ago, simply because we haven't gotten more meals tax in, we haven't gotten D-POL in yet, there's no other returns that we've received that will allow us to give a better viewpoint of that. So what we're asking your forbearances is to have us provide to you a full budget with multiple levels of expenditure sequestration that is based on a range of revenue projections. So trying to attack the min, the mid, and then something that is a little bit more or just slightly optimistic, a midpoint, and then a minimum point. We are looking for you to fund core services and activities, the things we've been doing throughout COVID, the things focused on health, safety, and welfare of the community, things that are focused on our statutory requirements that we must meet by either federal or state statute, things that we're contractually obligated to do, and also any secondary function that supports and protects these core services and activities. We're suggesting that should be an area where we should focus our efforts. We always talk about the town employees that demonstrate the commitment and investment in the town employees. Next, if we slide down a little further, onto the next page, The first one, strategies to minimize impacts to personnel and to maintain competitiveness in the local employment market. One of the interesting things about COVID-19 in national unemployment rates is whatever the national rate was, the Northern Virginia employment rate was substantially lower. And as we talked about a couple of weeks ago, I think actually my last week's COVID remarks, in Virginia in general, the unemployment rate was very good as comparative to other states. So that being said, we are still competing to keep people. We are still competing to attract people to work for the town of Herndon. And we need to do, there's some things we might need to do to position ourselves in that marketplace to make sure that we are providing staff that are here to meet the needs that the service needs of this organization. One of the other areas where we think we're going to see additional movement this year is healthcare costs. We do believe will rise again. They've been rising after a couple years of no increases. The past 2 years we have seen increases, and by every indication we're going to see healthcare increases again this year. One of the things that's not on here is we're in the second year of the retirement actuarials. So our retirement contributions will remain the same as last year. They won't go up. Next year they'll be reassessed again, but for this year they will remain constant. So that is not even addressed here. Funding training required to sustain key knowledge and skills. This is important from the perspective of one of the things we froze at the outset of the COVID-19 crisis is that we froze training completely. So we need to get back to get some of this training to occur. There are certain certifications certain people need to have to do their jobs. We need to make sure we're getting them the adequate training to meet those challenges. And then the third broad-based theme is to continue efforts to develop and maintain a strong fiscal position. This is something the town has enjoyed for a long time. So we're looking to prepare a budget with those multiple levels of expenditure control that we just talked about a few seconds ago, but also continuing to develop a multi-year revenue and expenditure forecasting in anticipation of impacts that might happen in the current climate, but what might be happening just outside of our reach. Case in point, we talked a little bit about this 2 weeks ago, and that was a potential, say, housing bubble that is occurring because of the unusually low interest rates. When those interest rates go up, what's that going to do to land valuations? And what are we doing to forecast that and prepare for that should that occur? Another area is exploring funding strategies such as the FY 2020 surplus or other revenue enhancements. Perhaps you might be interested in raising a tax rate or something to sustain key resources through the short-term economic downturn. One of the things that we're trying to really emphasize on it as we manage our way through this crisis is not to let short-term issues affect long-term positioning. And so we're trying to keep that in mind, and we may have to do some things in the short term to tide us over to position us better in the long term. And so the two of the areas where we think that might be necessary is potentially digging into the 2020 surplus that closed the last fiscal year with, and potentially if you instruct us to look at revenue increases in terms of tax rate increases. Two other bullets we threw in here that are very important is balancing the water and sewer service revenue with the operating costs. If you recall, we were on a 5-year plan to raise water and sewer rates. We were the lowest in the region. It was artificially low. It had been held artificially low for many, many years. And we had started to work on slowly correcting that. We pressed pause on it last fiscal year because we were in the middle of COVID, and we didn't want to be increasing water rates when we weren't sure if people were going to have jobs. So we took a press pause on that. We need to get back to that because there is you all were briefed on, as the previous council was briefed on, I will certainly be glad to talk to the new council members about this. We have an issue in terms of structural issue with our rates that we need to address over the long term. And we also have, and companion to this is we have some infrastructure issues we need to address, and we want to address them. So we want, in this budget, we are looking to begin to do some of that as well. So this was a mixed bag of some things at a high level that we had in previous council guidance resolutions that we think are still important, and some things that you were bringing to the table in the last budget guidance discussion. So with that, Jenny and I and Karen are available for any questions, and we can, and any maybe alterations to this document that you'd like to see for your consideration next week. Madam Mayor, we'll entertain questions.
All right, thank you very much. Does anyone have questions of the town manager and the finance director? I see Mr. Singh's hand up.
Well, I think we all got elected on certain platforms. We promised our constituents many things. And the question really would be that to what extent or how you would take some of those things into account, or when we make proposals to do those things. Is there anything that you have allowed in any budget to take into account those priorities, maybe?
If you're referring to the presentations that the vice mayor has given over the past two sessions,
Yeah.
is that what you're referring to?
I'm referring to, that four of us here did have some of those priorities. And we have promised certain things that we would do. And I think you need to, in terms of the overall guidance, at some point when we understand we have to propose and we have to take votes on that. But still, we hope that there is some room for taking into account those priorities and shift budgets as we need to. So that's one issue that goes to my mind. The other is that I've been on the council for a few times, and the guidance, the overall guidance, is for us very difficult to do. It is, I would say, it is almost impossible. That's why, because we don't know what the real missions are of each department, how many people they have, what their priorities really are. I think we need, maybe I would propose in the next, one of the items on our list was to have some briefing by the staff, different staff, different departments, so that we are clear about what their priorities are, we are clear about what they're expecting, and we can sort of see, well, maybe certain overall budgets need to be cut here or shifted here and so forth. We have always been in the past been totally blind to how to do this. So maybe there's something that you need to say, these are your priorities, these are different priorities of different departments, and this is why. For us to give you any guidance, you have to come for department by department and ask for certain things and explain why you need that money. That's my general.
I'm trying to, this is Bill Ash, town manager, I'm trying to discern a question in there. A couple things is, as always, the department missions, the department compositions are in the budget book each year. They are in the annual report each year. We can certainly do something in addition for you. That is a no factor sort of thing for us. We can do that. Gladly. But at this stage of the game, and literally that, I think those come into greater play when we're in the individual meetings with you. So as staff is meeting with you individually, that's when we're getting down in the weeds and some of the budget expenditures with the various departments. At this level, we're looking at very broad base. Do you want to do anything with tax rates? We're looking for that. Do you want to, what do you think about the employment, since 70% of our expenditures are in employment as an aggregate? Do you want to do something with raises? Do you not want to do something with raises? Do you want to, we're looking for very broad-based, very guidance. Where are our limits in a very broad-based way? Once we get into the individual budget meetings, after we've had a chance, I haven't even seen all the department budgets yet. I mean, we're probably 4 departments in to the various budget meetings. We're putting that together. We're putting together a broad-based, balanced series of budget sheets that then we will sit down with you all individually and walk through and answer questions and certainly take those. But if you want to see something in a very broad-based mission, what is our mission currently with the various departments and those things, that exists. The town publishes it all the time, but we will gladly give you a briefing if that's what you desire.
Know how to respond. I do not know how to respond to that. Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Friedrichs?
I just have two questions. So you referred to the FY 2020 surplus. Can you remind me what that surplus is, how much it is?
Jenny, would you mind taking that, please?
It was just a bit north of $2 million in the general fund, some of which was attributable to CARES Act funding.
So, pardon me, if it's CARES Act funding, then we can't use it for our next budget. Is that correct?
So it is in the unassigned fund balance, but it's not restricted because what contributed to the surplus was what we used to cover public safety salaries. Normally, that is something that we would have budgeted for anyway, and we were permitted under the federal guidance to apply some of that funding to public safety salaries. And so that made room, if you will, in the general fund. So the argument is that you could say that we preserved other dollars by doing that, but it's all fungible. So the reality is that you have about a $2 million surplus. Mainly that came from salary vacancy and the very just disciplined and the very strict spending measures that we put into place at the onset of COVID so that we didn't get ahead of ourselves. So we really did restrict a lot of things, and that included transfers to the CIP and things like that. So we did kick the can down the road a little bit to just preserve cash and to not make, again, long-term decisions in the short term. So, but yeah, it's about $2 million.
Okay, and what I'm seeing in the last discussion we had in the work session about the budget was that we were down many millions of dollars right now because we don't really know what B-Pol is going to bring in. It's like $8 million, if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct? Something like that?
B-Pol is, if you're asking what B-Pol is or what kind of our gap is. B-Pol at its strength, at its highest, is about 5.7 million. We budget 4.6, and I believe we actually dropped the budget to 4.2 million. But the shortfall that we're anticipating for fiscal year 21, it's not necessarily, when it comes to what is the authorized budget, it's a couple million. It's not necessarily 8 million. So what I think you might be asking is, aren't we potentially using up the FY20 surplus in 21? It's possible, but there still is unassigned fund balance that's well above that. That's up for grabs, if you will, along with revenue stabilization. So there are some mechanisms in there that if you choose to tap into your rainy day funds to get us through the short term, that's an option available to you.
And just to clarify, Bill, Town Manager, I think what you're thinking of is we are $20 million in the bank on a $32 million appropriation right now. So we're $11 million short at the 6-month mark. And we're estimating we're going to make up the $11 million between B-Pol returns, which have not been paid yet. That tax has not come in. Continued sales tax, continued meals tax, and very small transient lodging, and a few other things. There's some grants that manifest later in the year that don't come out at the beginning of the year. And when we are projecting out where those things are existing, that will make up the other 11 million, assuming they come in where we think they might. I want to go back and say it's probably, I think you had like 400,000 off at that point. So it's a little bit closer.
Yeah.
Right. Oh, sorry.
You said in the last week or last 2 weeks ago that we were going to need to possibly take about $400,000 out of our rainy day fund, or whichever fund it is. Is that right? If we got to the projections that you anticipate.
Actually, it's the reverse. Sorry, this is Jenny Tripoli, Director of Finance. I always forget to introduce myself. I apologize. So actually, it's flipped. The way I had the FY21 projections going, it looked like there would be about a $400,000 surplus, if you will. The delta that I was talking to that was a couple of million was potentially that delta between where we thought we might be with the authorized budget and where we might end up had it not been for CARES Act money in fiscal year 21. So I apologize if I confused you by answering a different level of difference. But yeah, so right now, if we keep expenditures locked down and revenues continue kind of the way we think they will, there might be a little bit of a surplus in 21. We would hope to be closer to zero, obviously, because we're trying to survive and not necessarily book a surplus, but that's just where the projections fell out.
And the last question I have is the water and sewer revenues. We got a grant from Fairfax County to offset the people who were not able to pay their bills. I believe of like 75,000 or 100,000. Do you remember that?
It's 50,000 that we got, and it's that's not a revenue enhancement. What it does is it wipes the receivable off the books for those folks who qualify.
Well, the reason I brought that up is we don't want to raise necessarily rates, especially if people aren't able to pay their water and sewer. So my question is, are we using up that $50,000, and have we already used it up, or what's the situation there?
So we're still processing the applications for it because folks do have to apply and complete an attestation form. We were given more time to do that with the relief package that was just passed by Congress. Even though it didn't give us more funding, it did give us more time. So ultimately, if people don't apply for it, then we will have to give that money back. But right now, I think the deadline has been moved to February, so the staff is rolling through it. So right now, we haven't even received the money yet from Fairfax County because they're our pass-through. And once we get all of the applications together, we can go through and look at who has applied, how much they've applied for, and then allocate it out that way.
Okay.
And
thanks.
That was good. Answer. Can I just add a finer point to that? Is yes. I don't want to confuse the issues of accounts and arrears, which is a temporary thing that we're working through, and that is less of a factor, and the structural problems we were having with the amount of money we were charging for the service, the water and the sewer service, and what it was doing as cost of everything's going up, cost of labor, cost of fuel, cost of equipment, cost of the commodity we buy from another service. So we are charging, we kept our rates at the same level while we were getting charged higher for the commodity cost, and we never raised the rates since like 2009 till we completed the study back in 2018. So we're looking at continuing along that trajectory to correct that problem so as we can keep this fund healthy. I'm not saying it's not unhealthy right now, but it's on a bad pathway if we don't arrest where we're sitting.
If I may ask.
Mr. Vice Mayor, let's go with people that have not had an opportunity to ask questions first, and then we'll come back to you, sir. Mr. Vice Mayor.
This is Vice Mayor DeLagula. So I think this is a good discussion and actually a good example. And by the way, just a comment. I think there will be a housing bubble soon. Everyone that I talk to, that I trust, portfolio managers, everyone is telling me it is coming. So I think we should definitely plan on it. The other thing, you mentioned the rates, the water rates from 2009 to 2018. That I think is just another indication of what I see as a reactive council. And I think what's proven true for me, at least this go round, we're into our second work session. I think you have a council that wants to be more proactive. And I think this is a great point to take into some of our strategic discussions. because Mr. Ashton, you've made the point. You've grabbed a few things, you put them toward us, but we have not had a chance to really prioritize our own initiatives. We may have some things that we deem are absolutely mandatory that may either help or guide what you do as far as executing that. One of the discussions may be, how do we, not cut staff, but how do we reposition or reallocate them throughout the organization to do the things that are priorities for us? So I love this discussion, but for me, it's too operational. I think going back to the more strategic view on these things, I think this is a great topic for discussion at our quarterly review meeting, and I'm anxious to get to that discussion. And I think this and the other things that we were talking about before, we need as a council to have those discussions. Right now, we're acting as individuals, but there's enough consensus and support to take this in more a strategic direction and give you those priorities that you then execute, and then you figure out how you support them and how you repurpose staff and resources. So that's my comment on this. Thank you.
Do we have, I believe, Mr. Reagan? Yes.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Councilmember Reagan here. Mr. Town Manager, if this sort of, guiding resolution had been done in years past, I'd appreciate seeing the last couple years of them, just to get an idea of the flavor of it. Because my hunch is that there's something to be learned in the words that aren't on the page as much as the words that are on the page, right? Like what gets left out.
Mr. Reagan, this is Bill Ashton, Town Manager. We can certainly provide those. This is historically something that has been done for a number of reasons. One is to, again, try to give us some guidance as we're crafting this, but also it's part of, and not to say that we're out to get awards every year. And as a matter of fact, we're going to talk as we get deeper into the budget about the GFOA awards and the budgets and how if it's truly necessary for us to do, especially in such an odd climate as we're trying to evolve some things. But it was part of the checklist that we would go through to get the GFOA budget award. That is not a reason in itself. But yeah, this has been done every year, and we can certainly provide those.
Mr. Singh. Oh, first, do any of the other, there's two council members that haven't spoken.
Well, let them speak first.
Okay, go ahead, Mr. Singh.
Oh, me? Okay. I don't know. Are you allowing me to speak or yeah?
Well, you were raising your hand and the other two did not have a question.
Other people to speak first. If the other people are there, since I have spoken first, they can speak. But if not, I will speak. I think, we're talking about budget. I clearly have not looked at the budget, all the projections and so forth. But there are some comments I would like to make, and that is for water and sewer stuff. These are passed through. They come from Fairfax County, basically, both water and sewer. But people have been complaining. During the campaign, there were people who were complaining about water and sewer rate. You might say that they, in fact, are lower than other jurisdictions. But the thing is that if they are passed through, we should pass through those costs to the public, not add more to that so that we become equal to some other jurisdictions. I think that we should enjoy the lower rates if possible. And so that would be my thing, because otherwise if you start adding to make it equal, it becomes more efficient and resources are allocated to other purposes other than water and sewer. And so that is sort of unacceptable to me. Other thing that we have heard is about that we have too many police people here. We need to have some sort of a discussion as Vice Mayor was telling, or I made in my first comment. So some of these things we need to discuss with the individual departments in some ways so that we can not only set a different course, but also understand where the needs are or what's happening. And finally, last comment on the stabilization fund. I'm a little confused. You know, we created a stabilization fund. Actually, I made a proposal. I think it is the same stabilization fund. A certain amount of money was going there so that we didn't have to. When I made that proposal, was to make sure that there were some increases, salary increases for the staff in situations where there were dire situations. That is what that really was for. And I don't know whether it is now used for other things. I'm not really sure about it. So I think that if you want to have a stabilization fund, which is there, it may be a time for discussion about how that money really should be used. I can tell you there are a lot of people who were against creating that fund because it would be used for other purposes. So some of these are, yeah, thank you.
Okay, Mr. Town Manager, yes.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Bill Ashton, Town Manager. Just a couple points that Mr. Singh made. Number one is the water and sewer rate. It isn't a pass-through per se. We buy the water wholesale and resell it. That said, even if we followed the projected rate increases we needed to have to make sure that this was still breaking even, it would still be the lowest rates in the region. We're still, the people we buy it from are like fourth or fifth higher than us on that list. So even if we do all the changes that we were projecting moving forward, it would still keep us positioned as the lowest in the region. And so that just answer that one question. Number two is the stabilization fund. Just want to bring you up to date. What we discovered when we took a deep dive into the financial policies back in 2017, 2018, when both Jenny and I came into these jobs. What we learned about the stabilization fund, unfortunately, is the way it was structured, it could never get used. It was untriggerable. We would have to burn through tens of millions of dollars of reserve funding to get to the stabilization fund. So what we did is we brought our financial analyst firm in, we revamped the financial policies, town councils adopted them to change the triggering mechanisms to where the stabilization fund could be used before we got to the tens of millions of dollars of reserve money. So it could be used to make minor modifications to where we are. And you'll be happy to know currently it sits at full, over the past 3 years, Jenny and I have worked diligently to make sure it was fully funded. So our stabilization fund is funded to its highest level as it was created.
If I may, Madam Mayor, respond.
Is it, Mr. Singh, do you have an actual question?
Well, nobody's asking questions here. People are making statements. The thing is that I would like to have actually a written sort of a description of how the stabilization policy changed, how it is actually being used, and if we have a right, we have thoughts about changing it in some manner as a council, we should take a look at that. It seemed like it is being used for some other purposes. Then
no, it's not. It's not being used.
One last thing, if I may say about I did take a look at all the water sewer rate. Of course, it is some years back. There is a pass-through cost that comes through, and then there was a charge that Herndon was attaching to that, and because of your own, I believe there was some charge there. I wrote an article about the what you call surplus in that fund.
Okay, well, Mr. Singh, thank you very much. Perhaps the town manager can get you that study that they did in 2018 that led us to start increasing the rates. It's very comprehensive.
I will provide the rate study, and it will correct some of the assumptions there that we are adding on costs to the top of a pass-through, because that isn't the way this fund operates. But we can get that to you. We also can get to you a copy of the financial policies. They're in the budget book, but we'll pull them out and send them to you as well.
That would be most helpful. And you were asking for directions from council, and I hope people will consider the types of directions that the staff has asked for so that we can give them that when they're out doing their work.
I think.
All right.
I may say,
Thank you very much. And we're going to go on to the next item, which is the ordinance to affirm corrections to ordinance 20-0-59 for a zoning map amendment, ZMA 20-01 for 450, 455, 460, 465, 470, 475, 480, and 485 Spring Park Place, approving a zoning map amendment for the Unified Commercial Subdivision. And with that, Dave Stromberg of the zoning administrator will give us this report.
Good evening again, Mayor Olin and members of the Town Council. Once again, I am David Stromberg, the zoning administrator. So this was for a previously approved zoning map amendment that was approved on October 27th, 2020. And the Town Council approved the ordinance, and this is for the properties 450 through 485 Spring Park Place to allow it to subdivide under the Unified Commercial Subdivision provisions within the ordinance. So there are 4 parcels there, and it was all developed and under single ownership since the 80s, and the current owner would like to subdivide the property so that there would be 8 parcels and their associated improvements, but it would still act as a single unified whole. So with that rezoning approval, there was a generalized development plan and proper conditions and modifications as part of the ordinance. There was a lot that was listed in the drafting of the ordinance that was inadvertently left off of the list of lots for those various modifications. It had always been shown in the general development plan that this lot was to be included. It was simply an error in drafting that ordinance that lot 3B was not in that final draft of the ordinance that went to the Town Council. So this modified ordinance before you, you can see the attachment where 3B is added. This is simply correcting that mistake, and this does have to go back to the Town Council to make that corrected mistake, though. So with that, I'm available for any questions.
If anyone has a question about this issue, and no questions about this correction. Okay. So the next item, number 9, is resolution 21G-21 to extend the approval of a special exception application 19-02 to allow the installation of a telecommunications monopole and ground facilities at 525 Grove Street. And Mr. Bryce Perry, the Deputy Director of Community Development, will have the staff report for us.
Good evening, Madam Mayor. Thank you, members of Town Council. I am Bryce Perry, Deputy Director of the Department of Community Development. And I do have a presentation for this, so if we could just give it a second here while it loads. There it is. Okay, so this item is a request to extend an already approved special exception SE 1902, which allows for the installation of a telecommunications facility to include a monopole, a tower at 525 Grove Street. Is the location of an existing Virginia Dominion Energy substation. This special exception was approved by Town Council back in April of 2019. Okay, a quick summary of this proposal and some of its background information. Freestanding telecommunications facilities are permitted by special exception in the zoning ordinance in all of the town's standard zoning districts when there are certain standards that are met. Those standards, which are found in section 71.13D, they address matters like height of the facility and the different equipment in the facility, screening of it, the lighting of it, and those types of matters. It was determined when this did go through, excuse me, the special exception public hearing process back in 2019 that the proposal did comply with all of those applicable standards. As approved, this special exception does include conditions of approval. Those conditions were included in the resolution approving the special exception, which was attached to the staff report for this extension. It's one of those conditions that specifically states that the special exception expires if the project has not yet received a final building inspection within 18 months of that April 2019 approval date. So as of now, as of today, construction has yet to begin on this project for reasons I'm going to get into a little bit later in the presentation. So that is what is triggering the need for this extension. Let's see, the special exception for this proposal is not the only legislative land use action taken for the project. The site was also rezoned back in April of 2019 to allow the telecommunications facility as proposed. Now, getting back to the topic at hand, the request for the extension, it's permitted in accordance with section 78-155.3G of the zoning ordinance, and which allows for a maximum of a 6 months extension, and that is what the request is for here. That would extend the special exception to April 23rd, 2021. And probably the most important issue to mention here is that the project has not changed at all since that April 29 approval. The extension simply gives the applicant additional time to complete the project as approved and as conditioned. I do have a few slides here giving you some detail into the project, given that it has been almost 2 years since the town council saw it, and we do have some new town council members. So 525 Grove Street, that's the subject parcel that's outlined here in yellow. It abuts the W&OD trail to the south and is accessed off of a private drive from Grove Street. This site was specifically chosen because, for one, it's already being used as a commercial utility site with the electrical substation. Also, it's not immediately abutting any sort of residential properties. Also, it really was ideal because it blends in a little bit with the transmission line towers that are immediately abutting to the south along the trail property. According to, and also really the reason why the applicant is doing this at this location, it isn't near the center of town, and according to the composite coverage plots that were done by the applicant, there is a need for cellular service congestion relief in the center of town, especially for in-building coverage. So the antennas that would be placed on this tower, on this monopole at this location would address those issues specifically. As for the facility itself, as approved, it does include the monopole. The monopole is 125 feet tall. It would have a series of racks, each of which would have antennas on it. That's indicated, the location of that is indicated by the red dot here shown in this exhibit. There's also a 100-foot by 15-foot screened ground compound where all the various utility cabinets, transformers, generators, that's where all those would be kept. The compound is screened by a decorative aluminum fence and evergreen landscaping. It's highlighted here in yellow, shaded in yellow and outlined in red. As mentioned, access to the site, shown here now in red, is gained from the existing substation driveway and a path, a footpath from the driveway to the fenced enclosure. And lastly, for this to occur, some of the existing landscaping screening for the substation that exists today will need to be removed, but the project does include the replacement of each of those trees and shrubs to be removed with new replanted trees and shrubs on a 1-for-1 ratio. So there won't be any overall loss in plant material to be used for screening. And before I move on, just as a point of reference, the substation here is shaded in blue, and the green line that's shaded here on the left side of the exhibit, that is an existing trail spur to the WNOD. That trail will not be impacted or used at all by this facility. This slide includes two of the photo simulations that were done showing a mock-up of what the monopole would look like from viewpoints along two of the nearest major streets. Let's see, the top one is from Eldon Street at the intersection with Grant Street. And you'll see the little red arrows pointing to the monopole as simulated. The bottom image is from Van Buren Street, over where the WNOD crosses over it. All right, the applicant has cited two primary reasons for the delay in construction up to this point. One was the merger of Sprint and T-Mobile, which held up the funding for this project. This project is being funded by T-Mobile. And also the delay on the sort of administrative and the processing side of things directly related to pandemic operations, both on the town side and on the applicant side. So staff does believe that those are justified reasons for the extension as requested. The applicant has been diligently working with the town on getting the necessary approvals leading up to construction. The Architectural Review Board has approved the design. That was back in October. And also the site plan has been approved also back in October of 2020. Again, this project has not changed at all. It is still meeting all of the applicable standards. It really simply has just been delayed, and that delay now requires this extension for it to remain essentially an active special exception. Staff has provided a draft resolution approving this extension and does recommend that action. That's all I have for this report. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Perry. And do the council members have questions for Mr. Perry about this item? Yes, Mr. Reagan.
Thank you. Sean Reagan speaking. Mr. Perry, maybe you explained this in your setup, but so what's in front of us today is whether to allow an extension of the special exception, correct?
That is correct, yes.
And so does the request for the extension go to the Planning Commission, or does it just come directly to us?
It just comes directly to the town council as a general item. So this is not a public hearing item that would require notification or advertisements in the same way that it originally did when it came through the process. If they are unable to meet, if it does get extended but they still can't meet that deadline, then that would essentially trigger the need for either a new special exception or an amendment to that original special exception.
Okay, and that would go
trigger. That would go back through the public process.
Okay, and then the reference to the ARB, I'm not clear on. Does the extension go to the ARB?
I apologize for that confusion. No, the project itself went to the ARB. So the design of the enclosure is what went to the ARB already. They had nothing to do with the extension.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Any other questions? Mr. Singh. Mr. Singh, are you muted? There you go. I can hear you now.
Oh, somebody unmuted me. Thank you very much. Those towers don't look very good. You know, I mean, you can. Were there alternatives to putting such towers in terms of design? Or this is what they proposed, so we are going along with it? Or, yeah.
When staff and the Planning Commission and the Town Council originally viewed this special exception, I believe there was support for this location because of its proximity largely to the existing transmission line towers that are already there. And this, some of those are almost as tall as the tower that's being proposed here. It is design standpoint, it is similar to the monopole that was approved at the Herndon Middle School, and also the one that was approved at the Dominion Energy yard, office building and yard, which is over off of Eldon Street. So there was support at that time for that design as proposed, as approved.
I understand. This issue actually came up, or the issue of using these monopoles came up when I was on the council. I don't remember which year it was, but there. And when they proposed that stuff, the designs were much more beautiful. Let me put it this way. There were more options, and they were saying it would not look bad at all. And these towers were not mentioned, the one we see now. I think that, if more of such towers come up, they are not going to look very good, in these locations. So that's my personal opinion. I think that's something that maybe staff and other people need to think about that stuff before more come up. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Singh. Does anyone else have a question? Ms. Friedrichs.
My question is really if the town attorney could elucidate on the question that Mr. Singh asked, because I was under the impression when this came before us that appearance was not allowed to be discussed. Am I wrong about that, Madam Town Attorney?
We do have multiple limitations that we have to operate within. I think perhaps Mr. Perry could detail those better with perhaps time if council wants to hear what those limitations are at the public hearing. I don't think I could recite them this evening, but things have definitely changed. There are federal and state laws that control what we can what criteria we can use regarding the monopoles.
Thank you.
And I do have one question, Mr. Perry. The biggest issue with this is not that there were any changes, it's the applicant, because of a merger and COVID, was unable to get things done in their time that they were given.
That is correct. Yes.
Okay. So it's already been reviewed by numerous boards. And yes, Mr. Singh.
I think I'd like to take a note that if you travel across the country and you see not only these monopoles, but also the telecommunication stuff being installed on multi-story buildings, people. Do
you have a question for the staff, Mr. Singh?
What I'm saying is that people have taken great care to make sure that the architectural aspects are respected or enhanced, and that these things don't look ugly.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Singh. If there's not a question, let's move on to the next item, please. Okay, so the next item is the general agenda. Last item is Resolution 21G-22 to initiate consideration of a zoning text amendment, ZOTA 2120, to amend Chapter 78 zoning, Article 4, Business District, Section 78-40-2, the Commercial Services District, to reduce the minimum front setback requirements in the CS zoning district. And with that, we'll have the staff report, and the town attorney will do that.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Lisa Yates, town attorney. Don't worry, Mr. Stromberg, I'm not doing your staff report. We thought it might be helpful for the new members who haven't heard zoning text amendment ordinances before to hear what happens. There might be some confusion over whether you're actually approving the actual amendment to the zoning ordinance at this point. And I just wanted to give a brief discussion that pursuant to our zoning ordinance, specifically section 78-155.2, amendment of the zoning ordinance shall be initiated with the approval of a resolution before the town council. The application to amend the zoning ordinance will detail the actual text to be amended and the reasoning and justification therefore, and you'll be seeing that this evening. If town council adopts a resolution referring the proposed amendment to the planning commission, the planning commission shall conduct another public hearing shall conduct a public hearing on the application and review the proposed amendment at that public hearing. At the close of the public hearing, the planning commission recommends to town council either to approve or disapprove or change the proposed amendment based upon the standards set out in the ordinance. And the report from the planning commission is forwarded on to the town. It will then appear, the zoning ordinance text amendment will come back to you, appear on one of your subsequent agendas for a public hearing, review, and action. At that point, you hold the public hearing after public notification, and you hear the proposed amendment and review the proposed amendment, including the recommendation of the Planning Commission. And at the close of the public hearing, you either by majority vote shall adopt the ordinance amending the zoning ordinance, or continue the public hearing, or refer it back to the Planning Commission, or disapprove the application. So tonight is just the beginning of the process to forward it on to the Planning Commission for public hearing. They make the recommendation, forward it back to town council for you to hear at a later public hearing.
Thank you, Madam Town Attorney, for that explanation of what we are doing. And now we're going to hear from Mr. David Stromberg of the zoning administrator to get the staff report. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Mayor Olin and members of the Town Council. So I am, once again, David Stromberg, zoning administrator, and this is an initiation for zoning ordinance text amendment, SOTA number 21-01, which is a proposal to reduce the front setback requirement in the commercial services zoning district. Next slide. So I also have a brief explanation of zoning text amendments and how they work. The zoning ordinance text amendment, it's a change to the town of Herndon zoning ordinance. The zoning ordinance is a local government's primary tool for regulating the use of land within its boundaries. There are some other town code chapters that regulate land, such as the subdivision ordinance and some public facilities ordinances, but the zoning ordinance is really the primary way to do that. So the town's ordinance is chapter 78 of the town code. So anytime you see a zoning text amendment to the zoning ordinance, that will always start with chapter 78. It can only be changed by local legislative action. It's not something that staff can do. And the authority to have a local zoning ordinance comes from the Code of Virginia. Next slide. So the Code of Virginia does require either the governing body or the Planning Commission to formally initiate consideration of a zoning ordinance text amendment. And in Herndon, the town council fulfills this role. Staff can't actually bring a zoning text amendment forward to any public hearings unless it has been formally initiated, again, by the town council. So after the initiation, staff will bring the text amendment forward to the Planning Commission for a public hearing where they evaluate the land use implications of the amendment and make a recommendation back to the town council. And then after the Planning Commission, the staff bring the zoning text amendment back to the town council for their public hearing. And then there will be a vote by the town council on whether or not to adopt the text amendment or to deny it. Next slide. So this particular text amendment was identified as one of several text amendments that we needed to make in order to implement some of the components and the recommendations of the South Eldon Area Plan. The South Eldon Area Plan was a comprehensive plan amendment that was adopted on February 12, 2019. And one of the specific goals of that plan was to encourage the reuse or redevelopment of certain existing commercial sites to support increased pedestrian, bicycle, and transit access to those sites. The current standards for the commercial services zoning district really originate from the 1960s town commercial districts that promote automobile-oriented form of development and site design. And then another factor that's actually driving the timing of this particular text amendment is town staff does have an application in for review for redevelopment of one of these small commercial sites within the South Eldon Area Plan. And the property owner is hoping to redevelop under what some of the proposed provisions are of this text amendment. Next slide. So this map shows you all of the town parcels that have commercial services zoning on them. And you can see they're really concentrated just in two parts of the town, both along Eldon Street. So the area at the southern end of the town is within the boundaries of the South Eldon Area Plan, and those boundaries are shown in purple on the map, and you can see that about 60% of the parcels there have that CS zoning. The other section of the town is along Eldon Street from Monroe Street, just before the eastern border of the town at the Fairfax County Parkway. It's not all of the parcels over there, but it is a number of them on the north and south side of Eldon Street going towards that Reston border. Next slide. So what this change actually does is, again, just reduce the front setback requirement in this commercial services zoning district. The current minimum distance for any building from the front property line to the building itself is a minimum of 50 feet. So this proposal changes the minimum distance from the building to the front property line to be 20 feet. And this is really to provide additional flexibility for people, especially on some of these smaller sites where they're redeveloping the properties, to give them more flexibility in how they locate their buildings on the site. But this does not change any maximum density or floor area ratios. It doesn't propose any changes to the side or the rear setbacks, and it doesn't change the required open space. It's not reducing that requirement. So the standards are still very similar, but again, it's giving that added flexibility so the applicants can put their buildings, the required parking, just have a little bit more to work with as far as the design of their site. Next slide. So next week, staff will be recommending that you adopt the resolution to initiate consideration of this zoning ordinance text amendment to bring it forward to the Planning Commission. So with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions.
And does anyone have any questions? And if you don't ask them tonight, you might be able to get Mr. Reagan to have a chat with you in the next week, as he's done many of these over the years. Any questions for staff? Ms. Friedrichs, did I see your hand?
Yeah, so what does 25 feet look like in practice? Where would I have seen something like this? Is it like the development, the housing development on the corner of Van Buren and the Parkway? The
No.
Stanley Martin one?
I think those are actually closer than 25 feet. I think they're probably in the range of about maybe 15 feet from the actual property line. Again, so this isn't from the edge of curb, it's from the edge of the property line. You have, but much of the streetscape is typically going to be within the right of way. So any sidewalks or grass verges with the tree plantings, that's all actually technically within the right of way. And then this 25 feet will be going from the property line.
Okay. Sorry, I know that's probably not germane because what we're doing is approving it to go to the Planning Commission, but I was curious. Thank you.
Mr. Singh?
Is it really not a person or any applicant to build a larger building than otherwise permissible, rather than arranging it on a site?
No, we tried to target this zoning text amendment to keep the density requirements the same. So they're still limited by the maximum square footage of a building they can do by their floor area ratio. But this gives them more flexibility for how they locate it around on the site. On some of these small lots, you're pushed back at that 50 feet before you can have your building. And sometimes it doesn't leave much room towards the backs of the site for some of those support services for your loading areas and things like that. So this just gives more flexibility for how you put the building on the site, but it won't let you increase the density or the intensity in those zoning districts.
Okay, that's all for the moment. Thank you.
Any other questions about? Okay. All right, that brings us to the discussion, and we have two discussion items on the agenda tonight. And the first one is the logistics planning for quarterly strategic review meeting, and I'll recognize the town manager.
Thank
Mr.
you.
Town Manager.
Thank you, Mayor Olem, Bill Ashton, Town Manager. I just wanted to have a discussion regarding how we're going to set these meetings up so that it meets your expectations. So I'm hoping to have a conversation. Some of the questions that I hope to hit upon tonight are when. And so we need one more immediate than the rest, but in future years, how would you like these things arrayed? At an opening of a fiscal quarter, at the closing of a fiscal quarter, somewhere in between? I would suggest probably if you're looking at, if you ever want to discuss, and it has come up, some budget items, that it would be at least 2 weeks after a fiscal quarter closes, so we start getting that last month's worth of data in for that quarter. The other things are things like day of the week that you'd like to have these meetings. Do you want them in the day or evening? That's another conversation. So the various conversations about when. I would like to get a better understanding of who. Who do you need in these meetings from staff? How would you like to see? Would you like to see this moderated or not? And an understanding of how the format will unfold. And then just some of the things about what. I know we're going to initially talk about the presentation that presented by the Vice Mayor of the past 2 weeks. But are there other items that aren't on that list that are on people's minds that they might want to include into this discussion? And then I need to have an understanding of how do you intend to propose us to analyze, discuss, determine courses of action, how we want to memorialize this, and I guess in the form of a resolution. And if there's any other items you wish to have discussed during these quarterly meetings, so we can begin to set the format and the timing up for you. So with that, Madam Mayor, I'll open it up to council to start. I'm just trying to get a sense of the vision that to better understanding of what your expectations are.
Okay, so do we have any questions of council on this item, of the town manager on this item? Yes, Mr. Vice Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This is Vice Mayor Galagos. So I think the town manager was asking for guidance. So these aren't necessarily questions. These are more guidance suggestions based upon what he's asking. So I think if you look at the presentation items, the initiatives are there. I guess where we may have failed is collectively ranking them. Obviously, with budget coming up, I think anything that impacts the budget should be at the top of that list. I personally have my, priorities. We discussed some of them this evening in terms of what things can be changed in the ordinance that just are counterintuitive, quite frankly. But I think at a high level, I would like to see them as early as possible, the first one. And then if it does make sense, then 2 weeks after the close of a quarter, with the idea being that what we're going to be discussing are either realigning or reprioritizing our sort of asks of you to execute, in terms of our direction and initiatives. But again, I think the moderation is important. I think if there is a moderator out there, or someone wants to volunteer for that, I anticipate this being a pretty lengthy discussion. As you can see, we can't have meaningful strategic discussions in work sessions, which is why we want these things separate. And here's an idea. Maybe we don't have as many work sessions or public hearings in a month, and we make one of those evenings dedicated to the strategic planning session, so we're not adding additional meetings to the schedule. I'm open to anything, but for me, it's imperative that we take the time to go through these items that impact the town's direction and the outcome we got to be aligned on. We're not going to have unanimous support on everything. You just need majority to move forward on these initiatives. So I think we constantly review them and update them as necessary quarter to quarter. I hope that helps.
That is a thank you.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Mr. Town Manager.
No. I was just responding, saying that is a good start to some of my questions. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Singh.
I think that in each quarterly meeting, or maybe really over a year, we should, let's say for the first one, limit, let's say if you want to have a discussion only with, I don't have an example, community development. If that is all we need to discuss, we can only discuss that. We can't have all these departments, or whatever the priorities are affecting different departments at the same time. We need to set that priority over a year so that we have limited discussion and time for preparing for us to the budget or whatever we need to do to come to the meeting so that we can have a decent discussion. That's my comment.
Yes, Ms. Friedrichs.
I'm starting to be to not understand what the purpose of these meetings are. I thought we were going to discuss the priorities of the council and plan for the priorities. I'm a little mystified by Mr. Singh's comment about the focusing intensely on one department. Is that how we're going to do it? Is that the plan?
Well, this is not the plan. This is just a suggestion on my part that we can't really be discussing many different departments, if you would say. We have to discuss limited number, even whether it is for 6 hours or 4 hours or whatever, whether it is 2 departments. If we don't prepare for those meetings, we need to prepare,
waste time.
We need to have an agenda. We need to reach a certain conclusions on that rather than let it go all over. I'm just saying that the subject matter of these quarterly meetings should be limited in whatever ways we want to do, whether by department or by something else. Some thought needs to be given to that. And then what do we discuss over maybe entire year or entire 2 years, if you would say. Some thinking needs to be done on that.
I see. Thank you.
Mr. DeCall?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This is Councilmember DeCall. I think the purpose of having this strategic session is to prioritize what we want to accomplish as a council. And, in terms of budget, in terms of, making our processes better, there are so many things, budgetary items, there are CIP items, there are long-term planning items, there are short-term accomplishment items, there are so many things we can change, improve. So the the scope is big. What we can do is obviously we can start the first session and talk about the initiative that we have put together, and also, bring more budgetary items in terms of, because in order to accomplish some of the agenda items, some of the priorities, we need budget. So we have to weigh and balance everything, what we can accomplish and not accomplish, during certain times. So we can certainly have that discussion. Kind of like prioritize the items based on the budget, based on the need, and then we can go from there. And again, this is not a hard and fast rule here. We can be extremely agile, and we can see, what we were able to accomplish, how much time we had, how much we were able to accomplish in terms of discussion or giving direction. And based on that, we can always change the upcoming strategic sessions. At this time, we really do not know how much time it's going to take, how much agenda we have, and what will be the outcome. So this will be kind of like more like a first hand, and then we'll go from there. We can always make it better. We can always adapt, inspect and adapt, and go from there. So I think at this time, whatever we have in the priority, whatever the staff can bring as well, the different departments can bring in terms of their priorities as well. I think we have to listen, we have to discuss, and we have to prioritize those items. And in terms of timing, I'm okay with Vice Mayor De La Guerra said, some of the evenings we may not have meetings, so we can probably use some of those times as well. In terms of audience, specifically the town council, town attorney, town manager, and maybe the department managers should be the first to start with. And then we can see how that goes, and we can always change that also. Thank you.
Mr. Reagan, I believe you had your hand up.
Councilmember Reagan speaking. I wonder if maybe this is a point of process. It seems to me that at this moment this is sort of trying to get everything onto a table, and we don't even know how big that list is or how big that table needs to be. I agree with what several people have said, that in the interest of time, we ought to focus on things that have a budgetary impact, right? And see how many of those things we want to tackle now, or candidly, which of them would just have to wait till next year. I wonder if, in terms of process, would it be appropriate for us, or maybe it's just for me, to kind of just write a few things down and send them to the town manager to ask that they get on this list that we're talking about? Or is it necessary that they're brought up verbally in this sort of a session?
Well, since we're trying to design this plane while flying it, Bill Ashton, town manager again, you can certainly write them up, send them to me, and I can distribute them to your counterparts and make it part of the record. So, or they can come up in a conversation. It's any way you feel the most comfortable. I would suggest there's no right or wrong way here. That's one of the reasons why I want to have this discussion, so we can try to format this, because again, this is new ground for both of us, and I just want to make sure we're able to meet your expectations. So if you want to send it in, great. If you want to discuss it, I'm sure that's perfectly acceptable as well.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Councilmember Nyla, Ella, do you have any questions or comments?
Mayor, thank you for asking. Yes. Thank you for asking.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure you had an opportunity to speak before we moved on.
Thank you.
Mr. Singh.
I think that since this is a new area, it might be worthwhile to see if other towns or city have such sessions and have done so successfully, and sort of what sort of form they. So we need to have a little bit of literature search, if you would say, to see how these things do happen and how they can be done successfully. I offer to look at literature out there to see if something is available so that we can have a discussion about this as to how to run them. That's what I would do. If needs to be looked at. So.
If I could just respond to that, I already have inquiries into several of my counterparts in other jurisdictions in the Northern Virginia region to understand how they do something similar. So far, I've not yielded anything quite like this, but I have a couple other inquiries out.
Yes, Mr. Vice Mayor? I think you're muted, sir.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This is Vice Mayor Delagula. So I think, Mr. Ashton, touching on everyone's points, I think the fact that this is so groundbreaking, strategic planning, it concerns me. Just in the sense that what a lot of us felt was happening is in fact the reality. We're too in this sort of ingrained mindset that we just kind of react to things, and we're going to stumble, right? We're not going to get this right the first time. So I think the guidance I would give to you and staff is look through the initiatives. Let us also send you maybe our top 3 discussion points. And with those items, I think it'll be a good start, because again, for me, it's budget. What do we need to accelerate and make decisions on that are going to have an impact on the budget? It may cost, it may reduce things. I have no idea yet, but I think the best guidance we can give you is let's block out some time. If it's on the weekend or in the evening, we're going to need a couple, maybe 4 hours. Usually when we do this in the corporate world, it's over a couple days. And I'm not suggesting we do that here, but I'm suggesting this is a serious thing. Defining the priorities and initiatives and the desired outcomes so we align, that's a big deal. But I think we need to do that, and I think the majority also agrees. So I would say let's. I don't know if we picked a day or a Saturday or an evening, but we're going to need a few hours to this, and we're not going to get through everything, which is why we also can bring them up in work sessions or lead them to the following quarterly strategic planning. So just know we're going to stumble. That's okay. I love what Councilmember DeCall said, be more agile. That's, I think, the mindset here. We need to be in a position where we can adapt to things a lot faster. So I hope that helps.
Bill Ashton, Town Manager. Yes, it does. Just a couple things. Normally this would be done, and it has been done before in the town, but it's usually done at a retreat. So, we all get together on a Friday night, all day Saturday, and we hammer out like 12, 14 hours of a mixture of visioning plus strategic initiatives for what's right out in front of us. We don't have that luxury because, again, a retreat over Zoom or over WebEx, that would be a grueling 12 hours. That said, we can certainly put something together that is more abbreviated. I think you hit a critical point that I do want to seize on for a second, and that is if you all could send those top priorities to me so we could start making sense of some prioritization so we're more efficient with our time once we get into, and I'll share those with everybody. That's no big deal. You'll see where everybody's mind is. But we can at least focus ourselves on what is truly important. And you brought up the other good point of what has budgetary impacts, because that's going to feed us as we are putting this document together in February. I think that is a critical point. So I thank you for that.
And Mayor, I have a comment.
Do you have another comment, Mr. Singh?
I do. I think one of the framework that we can look at is that our vision plan, whether it's 2030 or whether it's 2035, we have had that plan for a very long time. And what people have done is done whatever they're doing anyway, and then at the end of the year they put what they have done into those vision plans. This is the wrong way to do things. You have to say, I have a vision, whether it is a 1-year vision or a 5-year vision or whatever it may be. You have to say, if I want to attain that vision, what do I do this year or next 6 months or whatever? I think we need to have that vision of what this town will look like, and that initial vision expressed in that 2030 vision. How do we attain that? And in fact, I must say that all along that I have been here, that vision is like vapor. Nothing has really moved on. Nothing has been done and discussed to say how exactly we meet that vision. Whatever, you can pick a topic and that is there. So I think initially when we discuss these things, you just have to say, where are we going? Where do we want to go? Whether it's by department or whatever it may be. And then begin to put the pieces together. What do we attain? What do we need to do? Indeed, there is going to be a budget issue, whether it is this year or next year or whatever. I think as long as we have a vision, we can say, okay, we can't start this year, but we're going to start next year. You see, and so that is really where the benefit of such a prioritization comes in, and that's what I was talking about. Some sort of a framework that we can use to get started. 2035 vision is one, but there may be other things that we can look at. I think that's it.
Mr. Ray, go ahead.
And to Mr. Singh's point right there, this is a conversation actually the Vice Mayor and I had recently talking about the 2035 vision. And we don't go at the end of the year and just say, hey, and try to draw it back to the vision. Everything that we do at the beginning in the budget, if you look at the budgetary process, we draw major initiatives towards the vision. We try to get that alignment. Where the vision is broken down was in how it was designed. So when we did the design, you did the vision, or previous council did a vision. What we failed to do is we were looking 20 years in the future. We failed to establish waypoints at 10 years, 5 years, so that we can attach a strategic departmental plan to the 5-year waypoint and start aiming in that direction. From the strategic 5-year plan, we could develop 1-year operational plans, which would feed the budget, which would feed the 5-year strategic plan, which would push us towards those waypoints. That was one of the breakdowns. There's other breakdowns in the process too. I think the reporting structure was a little bit tortured, for lack of a better term. But I am very much open to us coming back, and this would be a retreat topic, coming back and looking at that 2035 vision and begin to give us those waypoints that staff needs to develop a 5-year plan against. I think that is a critical thing that we're missing. So if we could do that 5-year plan, I think it makes the 1-year plans a whole lot easier as we're moving forward.
That may be the way to go, and pick a topic or whatever within that vision. But we need to start with some framework. That's all I'm saying.
Mr. Reagan, I think you had a comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Reagan speaking. If there's one thing I've learned in my life, it's how difficult it is to find 5 hours on 10 people's schedules on short notice. I don't know how we're going to do that. I'm sort of intrigued by the idea of taking a work session, but I have no idea how difficult that is to do, procedurally. You cancel the work session and then the following public hearing. So I don't even pretend to know if that's a good idea. But I will say that even before we know what we're going to talk about, how we're going to talk about it, let's get a date. Let's get a date, because I think it's going to be really hard. Once they're on a calendar and it's quarterly, it gets easy. We plan our lives around it. But I don't want to wait until March. Yet I'm really just knowing, 10 busy people. It could easily be March. It could easily be May if we're not careful. So I don't know who's in charge of doing that, but man, let's just do that now, and at least we'll have the time set.
To Mr. Reagan's point, Bill Ashton, town manager again, I think the first one is going to be the most difficult. I think we cannot sacrifice our next work session and public hearing in February for this, because there are, as you're aware from the Planning Commission, there are certain things that are on a time trajectory targeted at certain dates, and I don't know what's out there targeting that date off the top of my head, but it's not something we can easily do. That said, is we are looking further downfield, as we're looking 6, 8 months, 6, 8, 10 months downfield. When we're plugging those dates in, that is something that we can consider. I mean, that gives us more flexibility. Now, bearing in mind, some of your public hearings may end up being brutally long as a result, as we're trying to pack a month's worth of things into one night. But that is something we'll take up. This first one we're looking at right now, and we'll start pinging you with scheduling, I would say probably tomorrow, if not the next day.
Thank you. Mr. DeCall, I don't believe you've spoken.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I think we're all speaking the same language here, and I think we all want this to happen. And, talking about the vision, we can always, align the initiative that we have, which fits into which vision, and obviously to accomplish those initiatives, how can we divide that into smaller tasks? So it's more like a work, breakdown structure to make sure we have something tangible, something achievable that we can do maybe in a quarter or maybe in 6 months. We can always divide that, first thing. Second thing, obviously, we're doing first time, and we're not going to get it right the first time itself. Like Council Member, like Vice Mayor said, it takes time, but at least, once we are done with the first session, even if we fail to organize everything, we'll still be one step closer to our mission, first thing. And the second thing is I love the concept of failing forward. So even if we fail, we'll be failing forward. This has never been done before, and we are doing it, and we will make it better. Every single time we'll refine it, we'll adapt, we'll inspect, but we'll make sure we fail forward. Thank you.
Any other comments? Yes, Mr. Vice Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. It's Vice Mayor DeLagula. So I think you've got, Mr. Ashton, the sort of the feel. We want this sooner rather than later. February, mid-February latest, I would say, and that's quarterly, right? So, and if it takes time on the weekends, we signed up to do the hard work. So I think if you had retreats in the past, and by the way, the predecessor to this mayor didn't want them. So I'm really
that's not totally correct, Mr. Vice Mayor. We just did not have one last term.
No, I was there. We asked for it.
Last term, Mr. Vice Mayor. Let's not disparage people. That's part of our code of ethics. It's part of our code of ethics.
It's my time, Madam Mayor. So let me just finish that. That was not the sentiment of the previous council or the previous mayor. So that's why we're pushing. This is absolutely required. And we're behind. We're behind because we've got major holes in budgets. We've got things we need to prioritize. So that's why we need to get on, the same page. And again, we're not going to agree on everything, but I think 4 votes, 5 votes carries the day. And those become the things that the town manager executes to. And how he delivers that, that's his prerogative. If it requires, readjusting or reallocating resources or hiring new resources, that's his role. Our role is to set the vision, to be clear and to commit to that. So I'm anxious for this to get started. We haven't done it. It hasn't been talked about in the past that I'm aware of. And I'm anxious to get moving on it. So thank you.
Okay. So seeing no other comments, we will have staff looking into some dates for us. They will have to be something that everyone can work on. We already have all of our public hearings scheduled for some time. So that leaves the days of our public hearings and work sessions unavailable for such a meeting. And there's also the staffing issue as well as a pandemic. So we do need our staff to look into this, our town manager, and see what can be done. If we take a number of staff out to take care of a retreat, how are we going to get our work done that is required for us to do as a municipality? So please get back to us with that, Mr. Town Manager, so we can move forward. And so the next item is to consider the establishment of a Herndon Multicultural Board. And we're going to consider establishing that board, and the town attorney is going to lead us through that.
Thank you, Mayor Olam. I believe I was asked to give a few comments just generally addressing at how ad hoc committees are created and how they are approved by council and stood up. And then I'll just take a few minutes to do that and give it back to you, Mayor.
Thank you.
There are certain committees and boards and commissions that are required by our charter, the Code of Virginia, or our town code. The other boards, like the Planning Commission, the BZA, other boards and commissions are referred to as ad hoc committees. And over the years, and from one council to the next, certain ad hoc committees do crop up. Some of them stick around, some of them don't. So this has been brought forward by, I believe, the Vice Mayor to be put on the agenda for a discussion to occur. What is expected pursuant to the ad hoc committee policy that has been adopted by council. After discussion and a concurrence of council, a draft resolution is prepared which contains the mission, goals, and composition of the proposed advisory committee. And all committees are advisory to council, with the exception of the Board of Zoning Appeals. The resolution is then placed on an agenda for review and action by council at a later council date. And thereafter, applications are solicited through the established process. Council reviews the applications and makes the appointments to the new committee. Appropriate staff is identified as ex officio members to provide primary and technical support for that new committee. But at this point, I understand that what is to take place this evening is the discussion of the proposed committee. So I hope that's helpful to your discussions moving forward. Thank you. I'd be happy to answer any questions if there are any.
Okay, and thank you. And I'll call on the Vice Mayor for his comments on moving forward with this.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This is Vice Mayor DeLaguila. I am going to defer to my colleagues, but I fully support this. I think it's, it's imperative that we have established a multicultural board for the sheer outreach effort, and certainly making this truly a home for everyone that everyone feels comfortable with. So I fully support this, and I'm looking forward to it.
Yes, Mr. DeCall. You're muted, sir.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Absolutely. This is very, very close to my heart. And thank you for bringing this agenda item here, discussion item here. Obviously, Herndon being a majority-minority town, and we have great deal of diversity here. Diversity in terms of races, diversity in terms of mindset, diversity in terms of many, many things. But we do not. What I realized while I was campaigning during the election and talking to people is people, especially coming from a different cultural background, they do not directly come and expose themselves and be part of because of the language barrier, because of, being brought up from a different part of the world. And I'm one of the person coming from the different part of the world, and I understand their feeling. And I realized, it may be, both way. They try to come, they try to give more input to the town decisions and everything, and bring more diversity and ideas. But at the same time, we have to outreach and we have to bring them as well. So I think having this diversity committee we call, or multicultural board we call, this will help us for that community outreach. And obviously they make the recommendation to the town council to provide the town of Herndon with the opportunity to enhance and celebrate the town's diverse community. And at the same time, they advise the council and the town on multicultural, multilingual staff recruitment effort, or even to recruit the diversity in other boards and commission. And there are people from different walks of life, from cultural background, and they make this Herndon right now so beautiful. And if we celebrate them, bring them together, obviously they can bring more strength to our economy, more strength to the ideas that we bring to the town. And obviously it definitely makes good, looks good. So that's the whole reason behind having the multicultural board.
Any other comments? Mr. Singh.
I don't know how to respond to this, to all. It's really, whatever board we start, I'm not sure it was originally, I didn't think that it was going to be government involved here. Some of these actions in terms of multicultural should come from the public itself. That's sort of what goes through my mind here. But still, at any start, whatever start we have, we must have some objective as to what we are going to accomplish, whether it's a formation within 6 months. Then do we have some functions of certain kind where people can all meet together and do something, whatever that may be, whether it is dancing or music or whatever else, so that we accomplish something solid, which brings the public together. I think that foundation has to be laid before we create a board and give some powers. Right now, this is just an idea amongst a bunch of people here that we need to have more cultural activities in the town. But if we move to either the government supported or even a private supported, then that really has to be thought through very well what the initial steps will be. It is not, to my way of thinking, is that whatever we do, we must succeed. Whatever we do, we must succeed. And then the rest of the public, whether the homegrown public here that have lived here for a long time, or whether the new ones are coming in. And the question really is, we have to have their buy-in. And if without a buy-in, nothing will go anywhere, really. It'll be very, very hard to do. So it's something, these are the issues that need to be thought through. We can create a board, but these are issues that really need to be taken. Somebody needs to spend time and, articles or write papers or write position papers or whatever it may be. But the public has to buy into these things. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments from other council members that have not spoken yet? Ms. Fredericks?
So I like where this is going, and I agree that we need a lot more conversation about it. This is another one of those things that needs to be refined, because there's a lot of enthusiasm, and I mean, as somebody who's worked in the arts and for years, I mean, I tried to do the very thing that Mr. Dakal is talking about in Herndon with limited success. And it's not, it's not that it's not I think it's a great idea, and I think we should do it. I think the question is just, narrowing down the scope, what kind of advice they're giving us. I mean, for example, a lot of the things that I've talked with Mr. Dakal about have to do with culture or festivals or, so there are places in the town where this would fit in various different ways. I particularly was thinking the Parks and Rec, but at the same time, I had another idea which grew from a bunch of committees I was on, and it had to do with multicultural issues, but it wasn't cultural. It was, it wasn't artistic. It was when we get ready to do an ordinance or some sort of regulation, passing it by a board of people who are very diverse, who are religiously and culturally and ethnically and disability and ability, all kinds of people, so that we can make sure we don't make a mistake that we won't necessarily pick up ourselves. Because I know what life is like from my point of view, but I don't know what it's like from somebody else's point of view. Absolutely. And so we have a tendency to have unintended consequences with, I hope in most cases, positive ideas. We want to do something positive, but we don't catch that one thing that's going to make it really not as good as we had hoped it would be. So I discussed this with Mr. Dakal and Mr. Singh and a couple of other of you, and I am still looking for a model myself, and I love Mr. Dakal's idea. It just plays to the things that I think are important too, that constantly reaching out and making sure that everybody feels that home feeling. This is you don't walk into a room and think, am I supposed to be here? You walk into a room and say, this is my town, and I am supposed to be here. So I support it, but I do think it needs lots and lots of discussion and narrowing. Mr. Singh's comments were very, very perfect for it. But I mean, I love it. So I hope we're able to come up with something that we all agree has ROI for the entire town, but doesn't, yeah, that's all I'll say. Sorry. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I concur with many of the comments that have been made this evening. And when we form a committee, we would need to have some objectives and functions that this committee is going to do. Otherwise, it's kind of when you show up at a meeting once a month or however often this group would meet, it's kind of discouraging when you show up and there's not really much going on. But I will say that in our community, we've had a lot of different groups that have stepped up and worked on these things. My dear friend, former Planning Commission member and arts enthusiast, Lester Seidel, with his work at Art Space, was continuing. He had cultural events all the time. It was absolutely awesome. If you didn't get a chance to go to them all, you really missed it, because he had a Korean event, he had a Japanese event, he had musicians from South America that were all from different countries that he brought in and put together. And then you go over to Runnymede Park when they have Nature Fest, and it's just absolutely awesome that all the cultures show up for Nature Fest, because the thing we all have in common is we have kids. And that's an event that people can get into and show up with their children and hang out at Runnymede Park and learn about things. But I hope that we're going to continue to come up with objectives for this group so that we're not just meeting to be meeting. And if functions are part of it, having cultural functions, then with the time of the pandemic, there's not going to be much opportunity. Most of those things have been canceled since last year. And I think we need to keep that in mind as well. Mr. DeCall, do you have a comment?
Yes, Madam Mayor, this is Councilmember DeCall. Yes, this is driven by an objective of community outreach, bringing people together, empowering people, and celebrating the diversity we have in town. And obviously, to look for more specific objective, we have many diversity commissions and multicultural board within the Northern Virginia. We can always model. I was looking at the town of Leesburg multicultural board. I was looking at the Loudoun County's multicultural board, how they function, and how many members are there, and what is the qualification to be the members, and how many years. These are the minor things we can always decide later. But the major thing here is to have a commission, a board where people can come and celebrate, and also advise the council to do more cultural activities to address or to empower or to recognize the different diverse communities within the town of Herndon. So that's the purpose. And obviously, I think we all agree on that one. And obviously, yes, I do understand we have to get the community buy-in. But, my only ask to the whole council is, rather than going with the question why, let's go with the question why not.
Mayor.
Mr. Singh?
I think, this is just a comment here. I was, as I mentioned several times, when I came to Pittsburgh, they had they didn't call it a multicultural folk festival. I don't remember exactly what they said what the name was. But I was new. It was like in the first or second week of my being in this country. They had a function which is highly enjoyable. There was Hungarian music, Irish music, or whatever else was going on. And I still, 50 years later, that was the most enjoyable moment. We could have a function of that type without having a board, but somebody organized all that stuff. Somebody planned that. The community had bought into it. So I think it is good to look at, maybe as the Councilmember DeGaulle was saying, we need to take a look at different models that people have used to bring people together, to do things together, before we constitute anything. Before we constitute anything, we can have a function of some kind, the folk festival or some schedule that, whether it's this year or next year, something of that sort. The spirit would be there, but it requires a tremendous amount of organizing to create any board, to create a set of people. The mayor talked about less like that. He tried to do many things. So I think at the end of the day, somebody has to do the work. We can create a board, but somebody has to do. Volunteers from different communities have to be there, have to spend time. This is what I mean by community buying in and getting involved. Some groundwork needs to be laid before we do something formal. So.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Singh. That was right on spot. And with that, I think we do need to have some more information, input coming in from the public as well as staff, so that we can look into how to make this committee successful. And that's where we're going to go. We all need to bring some examples in so that we can have things to go. And the next part of our agenda is the roundtable. And this is reserved for comments by our council. And who wants to start this off? Because we do need to go into a work session after this. We have a closed session after this. And so let's get to the round table and move forward. Ms. Friedrichs.
Hi. I had a discussion earlier today with Naila Alam. She, I don't know if you remember from our meeting 2 weeks ago, we were discussing committees, but we were unable to find anyone who wanted to be on the NVTA PCAC.
We're at round table right now.
Yeah.
Round table.
Yeah.
And then we're going into a closed meeting? Oh, okay. I thought you were nominating someone for one of the boards and commissions.
Well, I sort of was, but not quite. Ms. Alam would like to take that position, and I was hoping that other people would support that because she'd be wonderful at it. We don't have to do it now, but I just wanted to bring that up and hope that she would have some support for that. Thanks.
Okay. Anyone else? Comments? Comments? Going once, going twice? Okay, just wanted to let folks know I did attend the Herndon Chamber meeting today. It was excellent as usual. I encourage any of you that want to find out what the business community is doing in Herndon to jump on board. And we did have one individual that just, because Herndon has the volunteers, we're always turning things out. This individual had grown up here, had been away, and is back. Kay Scary, who probably some of you have heard about, decided she wanted to do something after the COVID started. So she started her, I believe it's called Health Cares, Herndon Cares, and she just got people together and they band together, started looking for donations, and had enough to purchase 63 meals, all from Herndon restaurants. And then they kept growing and growing. And they have served thousands of meals by using our Herndon restaurants. So there's two things they're doing. They're supporting our economic downtown, all the businesses, the restaurants that needed so much help after the COVID started, and they're feeding people that absolutely couldn't eat because they had lost their jobs due to the COVID. So we've got those folks out there. There is something called Stuff the Bus with Fairfax County. You'll see flyers out, but I think people in this community are constantly collecting food and so forth. I know Rotary has done a lot of that. And the closest office to us with Fairfax County is at Hunter Mill to Stuff the Bus. They'll have something so that you can take food donations, that they're raising money for that, and keep those folks in mind. And the Northern Virginia Regional Commission, which I represent the town on that committee, we have sent a letter to our U.S. Senators, Warner, Kane, and our Representative Conley, asking that they increase the vaccination production with the new president coming in tomorrow. And also they're asking to provide extra funding for our schools, K through 12, so that we can reopen those schools safely. And also $350 million for local government support, $1 billion for local government support, and we're supporting that so that money will come back to state and local governments. And that's part of why we've survived, is because of some of that money coming back into the community. And with that, we're going to take about a 5-minute break. Nope, wait, we have to go into the closed meeting and then we'll take the break. Sorry.
Madam Mayor?
Yes.
I'm not feeling well, so I'll skip the closed session today.
Feel better, sir.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Okay, so did the town manager have any comments first?
Nothing more, Madam Mayor. Thank you.
Okay. So we do have a need to go into a closed meeting tonight. As a reminder, only public business matters, lawful lawfully exempted from open meeting requirements by Virginia law are allowed to be discussed by the council in the closed meeting. These matters must be clearly stated in the motion to convene in the closed meeting. I will now ask if there is a motion to go into a closed meeting under section 2.23711A1 of the Code of Virginia for the discussion of prospective candidates relative to appointments to boards and commissions. Is there a motion? Friedrichs? And is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Reagan. Is there a discussion on the motion? With that, I'll call on the clerk to call the roll, please.
Delagula,
Delagula, yes.
Allen, Friedrichs,
Yes.
Reagan,
Yes.
Singh,
Saying yes.
Mayor Olem.
Olem, yes. That passes 6-0 with Mr. DeCall has left. The time is now 10:09, and I'll ask the council to take a brief 5-minute break so we can clear the call, and we'll be back here at 10:19. I'm sorry, 10:14. 13.
And if everyone can mute their microphones while we take care of the technical business. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Jess.